We're on the record. This is the July 25th, 2018 formal hearing of the Utah Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining. Our first agenda item is docket number 2018-010, cause number 131-154, in the matter of Crescent Point Energy, U.S. Corp. We'll now take appearances of council.
Mr. Chairman, Mitch
A little
Mayo.
closer to the mic.
I apologize.
And that, the one thing that is hard for most people is speaking where you're almost touching the mic, but that's, I can hear what's going into the record.
Okay.
And that's important for our due process and for the public that is watching outside of this hearing room.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes, quite a bit.
Thank you. Mitch Mayo on behalf of Crescent Point.
Mr. Chairman, Steve Alder on behalf of the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, just for a preliminary matter on this and the second or the following item.
Okay. Anyone else?
Meg Oswald for the Utah Attorney General's Office on behalf of the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining.
Okay, and I understand that there is a preliminary matter to discuss before we go into the merits of the case. Is that correct?
Yes, and if it's all right with council, I'll just outline that very briefly. There was a request, since the statute has been changed, as the board's aware, to allow for an order in a force pooling to apply to subsequent wells that are drilled in that same drilling unit. The language of the statute, it's 40-6-6.5 subpart 12, and there was a memo submitted by the division on this. But the language arguably applies without rulemaking. We at the division were concerned that rulemaking is needed to clarify how this statute would apply. Crescent Point has graciously agreed that they will ask that the board not, and I hope I can say this correctly, they'll withdraw their request that this order apply until there is rulemaking, with the understanding that any rules that are adapted will apply as this order proceeds to apply to subsequent wells. But if there isn't any rulemaking, or if that rules are found to be unenforceable or inadequate in some way, they reserve the right, since the statute arguably does apply without rules, to have that option reserved to them, so that this order may apply to future wells if there isn't rulemaking. Did I say that? Okay.
You said that really well.
So, with the board's understanding, if that could be part of the orders in both cause 131-154 and 131-155, the next two items on the docket, then we appreciate the stipulation and would just ask that if there's any questions, the board make them known. Otherwise, we just ask that be part of the order.
Okay. Board members, do you understand what that is? There's kind of two ways to look at it. One is to put the issue in abeyance until we've had a chance to go through our rulemaking and administrative process. Another way to look at it is sort of like a bifurcated hearing, where we're taking the merits of the main case and reserving the ruling on the other. But because you've already stipulated, we'll go with the stipulation, and that will be part of the order. Is that, board members, you understand that? Okay, with that, then, and I believe that's agreeable. Is that, I don't think we need a vote. I think that's a procedural step, but we will preserve that right. That question will not go away until, and will be part of this matter going forward.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to offer Crescent Point's sentiments on this. Crescent Point's prides itself on being an innovator, but on being a responsible operator first and foremost. The reality is this statute has been a long time coming, and it's something that's necessary to decrease the administrative burdens on both the board and the division. These forced pooling hearings can be a little cumbersome, a little tiresome, and a lot of these owners simply are dead with no trail. This is a system that's been necessary, and Crescent Point's eagerly looking forward to this, but out of respect for the division's position and the important work the board does, Crescent Point's happy to agree to this stipulation.
Thank you very much. And just for the, Mr. Alder, the memo was very well written and very helpful on this. What we're looking at, just so as you move forward, is the administrative efficiency of where this is, where we're headed, and the fact that it's one of our board's top priorities is to address this issue. But we also want to make sure that there's points along the way for due process to be included in that. We don't think it'll be possible for some of these unlocatable people to be found, but the Hegarty and precedent that the Supreme Court has given us, we would like to have points along the way where that due process is done. So as you look at it and make your recommendations to the board on what this framework would be for doing this, and we intend to do it, and we would like your help as we move down that road. So
Absolutely.
keep that in mind.
Absolutely. Crescent Point would.
Mike, you got anything you want to add to that at all? Okay. With that, then, let's go.
Can I address one more preliminary matter, Mr. Chairman? It's been brought to my attention. I don't do Crescent Point spacing, and I wasn't here at their last spacing hearing. I was here watching, but I wasn't here participating in the order that was entered in May of 2017. It's come to my attention that Crescent Point may have missed their latest reporting
Yes, they have.
requirement. And I
Yes.
just wanted you to know,
It's all your fault.
I'll take all blame for that. One thing I can say without a doubt is that Crescent Point will get to the bottom of it, and we'll get your report as quickly as possible. I'm under the understanding that, and again, Mr. Stone, who's one of my witnesses, works at Crescent Point, but also wasn't a part of that hearing. It's his understanding that it was maybe an August reporting deadline, but regardless, that report will be in shortly. I can assure you that.
To be clear, we didn't say it was your fault. What we said is we're blaming you.
And I'm taking that fully. I appreciate that. It'll make the other blame sting less.
And let's put that in context. We're very serious about a couple of things. We call them a pilot projects. We want to be on the leading edge as you do, and it's obvious from the quality of your expert witnesses and what you're doing that you're on the leading edge. We need feedback, and even when we get it right, we're still asking ourselves and asking the division, how could we have done it better? And so we're trying to figure out as we do these rules and go through the rulemaking process of how we can do that. One of the lessons that we're learning is that what you're doing has caught the attention of the highest levels of state government in an extremely positive way. And to the point that the state is looking at providing $30 to $50 million in seed money, help Crescent Point get its production to the interstate market. Right now, it looks like it might be a railroad starting at Maiden and going towards Craig, Colorado. There's really only one thing that can unravel this. We screw up on, well, two things. One is we screw up on the rulemaking, and in doing so, we fail to let you know the rules of the game before you play. The second one is split estate, surface landowner issues. Right now, we have the governor, the legislature, regulators, are all in our favor, saying go, go, go. But if we lose the political high ground, so as you look at this, where we are, take back to your management that treating the surface owners fair, or even a little more than fair, and you have to decide that, not us. Take that political issue off the table, that the state will then provide the seed money to assist you in accelerating your cash flow over the areas in which you're responsible. That's a political reality that we can't handle, only you can. And so we're not asking you to break the bank, but our experience is that when you hire contract landmen who want to have a long-term relationship with you, that they're looking at issues in ways that could create political problems. And never turn your head to free money. And that's what the state is looking at offering right now. So will you take that message back from the board? Mr. Moon, do you want to comment on that?
No, sounds good.
Okay. Having said that,
It's really valuable.
we're excited to hear your hearing today. We're excited about your evidence. We look forward to it. So would you proceed?
I will, and I will try and go as quickly as I can because we've got two in a row here. If I'm going too quickly or if I'm mumbling, please don't hesitate to call me out. The first matter we will be hearing today is the Hicken well. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mitch Mayo for Lear & Lear, representing Crescent Point Energy, U.S. Corp. With us today are Mr. Andrew Stone. I called him the team lead, but what is your actual title?
I'm a landman, not the team lead.
The landman for Crescent Point, and Mark Ballard, who's behind us, is the senior development engineer for Crescent Point. Could we please have the court reporter swear the witnesses in at this time?
Yes, proceed.
Will you raise your right hands? You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
I do.
Thank you. The resumes of Mr. Stone and Mr. Ballard have been submitted as part of Petitioner's Exhibit A today. If separately asked about the contents of their resumes, they would confirm the same is true. Mr. Stone has testified before this board on past occasion as a fact witness, and he will be just that today, a fact witness. Similarly, Mr. Ballard has appeared before this board and testified as an expert witness in petroleum and drilling engineering in prior causes. In light of their resumes and past practices of the board, I would like to move to admit Mr. Ballard as an expert in petroleum engineering in this cause with presumed stipulation from counsel.
Division?
No objection from the division as having him as a petroleum engineer. Is that what you're?
Petroleum and drilling engineer. Is that
Okay.
better? That's it.
No objection, but with reserving the right that if more geologic-specific questions come up or are necessary to meet the burden of proof, that reserving the right to object in the event that that comes up.
Fine. Board members, any objection? Being none, he's so admitted for the purposes of petroleum engineering, and I heard also geology engineering, or?
What is your expertise? Are you comfortable?
Petroleum engineering, but I can also answer geology.
Yeah, I mean, I think his training and his expertise are in petroleum and drilling engineering. And he does have a background, obviously, in geology, so to the extent that he can satisfy the division's concerns when it comes to any gaps in evidence, may they be in geology or understanding.
With that understanding, is so admitted as an expert for this hearing.
Great, thank you. Also, I will be moving for admission of all our exhibits at the end of my case in chief.
That's our preference. Thank you.
Thank you. This cause involves a standard two-section drilling unit targeting production from the Lower Green River and Wasatch formations. Collectively, we'll be calling those formations in this hearing the subject formations. This drilling unit was most recently established, as we just talked about, by the board in May of 2017 in cause number 131-150. Pursuant to this order, a true and correct copy of this spacing order has been presented as Petitioner's Exhibit D. Pursuant to this order, Crescent has drilled and is now producing from the HICKEN TRIBAL 15-9-4-3-1E-H1 well, which wellbore is physically located in Section 9 and produces from Sections 4 and 9 in Township 3 South, Range 1 East, in Uintah County, Utah, within the Central Randlett Area. And this will be calling the subject well, or sometimes the HICKEN well. The subject well began producing on April 22nd, 2017. As previously mentioned, the subject well produces from Sections 4 and 9, which are collectively a slightly irregular 1,305.95 acre stand-up drilling unit, which is comprised of 13 separate mineral tracts. A unit mineral tract plat depicting those 13 mineral tracts has been submitted as Petitioner's Exhibit E in this cause. Of the 13 mineral tracts in this unit, 1 is state land, 4 include Indian allotted lands, and 8 of the tracts are owned in fee. There are only 3 fee interests that have not been voluntarily pooled: the mineral interest owned of record by Ben Vigil, the heirs and/or devisees of Bohemia Canapatch, and the heirs and/or devisees of Julian R. Martinez. Collectively, those will be referred to in this hearing as the unlocatable owners. A copy of the unit tract ownership schedules has been submitted as Petitioner's Exhibit F in this cause. Collectively, the unlocatable owner's interest constitutes a portion of tracts 1 and 8, or roughly 1.3% of the unit. Despite Crescent Point's extensive efforts to locate the rightful heirs, owners of the unlocatable owner's interests, many of these heirs and/or devisees have proven to be unlocatable. In addition, Crescent has mailed an offer to lease and/or participate in the subject well to the heirs to the last known address of record for Bohemia Canapatch. As a result of the mailing, for the past 4 months, Crescent Point and I have been in contact with the purported heirs of Bohemia Canapatch and with the tribe, both of which have alluded to the possibility of an ownership in her minerals. To be clear, neither party has taken any steps to prove that at this point, and this well has been producing for well over a year. One more further clarification: we were reached out to recently by someone who is interested in the BIA and mentioned to us that we couldn't force pool tribal interests. We are in no way seeking to force pool tribal interests. This board doesn't have jurisdiction over it. We couldn't do it if we wanted to. However, as a quick backstory, tribal allotments are held in trust for tribal members. It's my understanding that at any point in time, one of those trustees, one of those beneficiaries of the trust, can request to receive their interest in fee and have it no longer managed by the tribe for them. This is what's happened in these instances, and so the tribal interest has been leased and is voluntarily pooled in the unit. These fee owners received their interests at some point in the past and have disappeared. And so they are private fee owners who may have Native American ancestry. We don't know who actually the owner is at this point, but that's the information that we've got. So just to be clear at the outset. In a further attempt to reach any of these unlocatable owners, Crescent Point, pursuant to order of this board, published a notice of opportunity to lease and/or participate in the subject well, and supplemental notice of request for agency action. This notice was published in the Uintah Basin Standard and Vernal Express for 2 consecutive weeks. Affidavits identifying these publications are included as Petitioner's Exhibit M in this cause. No party has responded or paid its portion of the well costs as a result of these notification efforts. Thus, Crescent Point is seeking in this hearing to force pool the unlocatable owner's interests, effective as of April 22nd, 2017, the date of first production in the well. Because no interested parties have timely objected to this request for agency action, pursuant to Utah Admin Code Rule 641-104-150 and 641-108-400, we would move to enter default against them. In this hearing, Crescent Point seeks to apply the terms of the JOA and the acreage-weighted average landowner's royalty to the mineral interests at issue. The terms of the applicable JOA have been determined to be reasonable and just by this board in past hearings. This board has jurisdiction over this cause pursuant to Utah Code annotated 40-6-6.5. Notice was provided to all interest owners at the last known addresses of record and by the publication of notice ordered by this board. Petitioner's Exhibit L contains photocopies of the certified mailing receipts mailed in this matter and the responses, if any, thereto. With that, I will begin my examination of Mr. Stone.
Proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Stone, begin by stating your name and business address for the record, please.
Andrew Stone, Crescent Point Energy, 555 17th Street, Denver, Suite 1800, Denver, Colorado, 80211.
Thank you. And what is your current position with Crescent?
I am a landman covering this area where the subject well is.
Okay. Do you exercise a supervisory role over the land records associated with the subject well?
I do.
And please provide the corporate and bonding status for Crescent Point, if you would.
Crescent Point is a Delaware corporation. It's in having good standing. Principal place of business is Denver, Colorado, and we are bonded.
Thank you. Now, please turn your attention to Exhibits B and C. Pooling unit locator map is Exhibit B, and the well survey plat is Exhibit C. Do you recognize these exhibits?
I do.
And were these prepared by you or under your direction or supervision?
Yes.
Looking at Exhibits B and C, can you, let's start with B. Can you orient the board as to where the drilling unit at issue is located?
Absolutely. So the drilling and spacing unit will be outlined there in yellow. It will contain sections 4 and 9 of Township 3 South, Range 1 East. This is Uintah County. As you can see, town of Randlett is roughly 4 miles to the east. Fort Duchesne is a couple miles to the northeast. And Ballard and Roosevelt are 6 to 8 miles to the northwest.
Thank you. Exhibit C, well survey plat. Please help the board understand where the drilling is taking place.
Sure. So this is a pretty standard well survey plat. It comes with every well that we drill in the basin. This is prepared by a third-party contractor, which Crescent Point has hired to do this. From the plat, you can see in the bottom south half of Section 9, that'd be the southwest of the southeast quarter. There's a black dot with a diamond around it. That is going to be the well surface location. From there, the well is going to be drilled directly south to north through the entire west half of the east half of this DSU. And the landing and termination of the well will be about 330 feet from the north line of the northwest of the northeast of Section 4.
Thank you. Now, please, we're going to turn to Exhibit E, the unit mineral tract plat. Do you recognize this exhibit?
I do.
And was it also prepared by you or under your direction or supervision?
It was.
Please describe this exhibit to the board.
This is a unit mineral tract plat. As you can see up top, it'll have the location of the DSU where the well is going to be located. In this case, obviously, sections 4 and 9 of 3 South, 1 East. This particular unit mineral tract plat has 13 different unique tracts in it. Each tract is represented by common ownership. So you would have each color representing each tract, and then on the side you would show how many net acres are going to be in each tract. For example, Tract 1 is the entire northeast quarter of Section 4, and it's 169.02 acres, and that would all be common ownership.
And the unleased, the tracks in this unit that have portions unleased, if I'm not mistaken, are tracks 1 and tracks 8. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And tract 1, as you stated, is the northeast quarter, that yellow box.
And then, and then Tract 8 will be that east half of the northeast of Section 9. It's kind of a dark red.
That's right. Thank you. Now I'm going to turn to Exhibit F. It begins on, do you recognize this exhibit?
I do.
Was it prepared by you or under your direction or supervision?
It was.
And what does this exhibit generally demonstrate?
This is the tract ownership schedule, so this is the actual breakdown by tract of the entire DSU. So up top, you can see, we'll just start with tract 1 as it's listed here. So this is 3 South, 1 East, Section 4, and this will be lots 1, 2, 5, the southwest of the northeast. And so in its entirety, it is the entire northeast quarter of Section 4, and it's containing 169 net acres. And as you go down the list, you'll see the mineral breakdown. So first you have the mineral ownership, which will total 100%. And then you have the lease and consenting parties, which these could be working interest parties or people that we were able to lease. And then on the next page, you'll have the unlocatable or non-consenting parties, which is obviously why we're here today.
And the two unlocatable non-consenting parties in this are Ben Vigil and the heirs and or devisees of Bohemia Canapatch. Is it accurate that those come from fee patents from the tribe? They used to be covered under allotment number 687, Monk 32, Sarawak?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you. Let's also look quickly at Tract 8, just for the same understanding. Is it also true at the unlocatable owners at the bottom, we have heirs and or devisees of Julian R. Martinez? Can you tell me where his interests come from?
Yes, that interest will come from, that is in obviously Tract 8, and these are going to be, so the heirs and devisees of Julian R. Martinez are going to come from Monk 102, at the heirs of allotment.
Thank you. How are the ownership interests in the well determined?
They are comprised of record title. So,
And how do you determine record title? Do you, I'm assuming, prepare a title opinion
So there's
before
a-
the drilling of a well?
yeah, so there's a drilling and division order title opinion that is prepared by Lear and Lear, and they use record title in order to lay that out for us.
Okay. And still on Exhibit F, when was that title opinion completed?
Originally, it was completed in the late summer, early fall of 2017. However, it was updated in preparation for this hearing to make sure that there were no, gaps and to make sure that we had everything in a line for this, and to make sure that the unleased owners were still there and that there weren't any more that we may have missed.
And when was that update completed? Do you know?
That update was completed on March 5th of this year.
Okay. What did that March title opinion then conclude in summation about the ownership and the unleased interests in this unit?
So it concluded that a portion of the two different tribal allotments, Monk 32 and Monk 102, are owned in fee and are unlocatable.
Okay. And those, if you'd quickly run down those three owners again that are unlocatable and unleased at this point?
Yes, so Ben Visual, Bohemia Canapatch, and those are of the Monk 32 allotment, which is Tract 1, and then Julian R. Martinez, which is of the Monk 102. And we were able to lease some of the owners in Monk 102 since we had the update of the title opinion.
And just to be clear for the board, if I may interrupt questioning to explain, the board's understanding, I'm not sure what it is on BIA process. It's my understanding they do all record keeping internally, and they the only way to really know who the owners are of an allotment is by getting what's called a title status report from the BIA. Sometimes these are easier to come by than others, and once a title status report has been received, it will identify names of owners at a fixed date and time when they asked for a fee interest and when they received a fee interest from the tribe. Sometimes it's in the 40s, sometimes it's in the 90s, but we have to take that information then and try and track it down. Back to questioning, is that how you located the two owners that you have leased since then?
That is correct.
They were listed on the title status report that you eventually received from the BIA?
Correct.
Thank you. Mr. Stone, now we're going to turn to Exhibits G through J, and I'm not going to pull them all up at this point. But do you recognize these exhibits?
I do.
Are they official business records for Crescent Point?
They are.
And were they prepared in the ordinary course of business?
They were.
What do these exhibits collectively demonstrate?
Collectively, these represent a well proposal packet, which is sent out to all unleased mineral owners in a well.
Okay. And could you step through each of the exhibits and kind of talk about them?
Sure. So the first one is going to be Exhibit G, which is the opening of the packet, which is a letter that basically lays out the options of kind of where this unleased owner sits. It'll lay out an offer to lease, and it'll also lay out the remaining portions of the packet, which include the offer itself, the actual oil and gas lease, the JOA, and then the authorization for expenditure, which is the actual cost of drilling and completing the well.
Excuse me. Thank you. Exhibit H, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So this is a pretty standard oil and gas lease. There are some blanks in here which are open for negotiations, along with the term and the royalty bonus, et cetera.
And Exhibit I.
So this is an authorization for expenditure. This is also included in the packet. This breaks out the actual estimated cost, upfront cost of drilling and completing the well.
And does it likewise inform the owner of their portion of the well cost?
Correct. So if they were to participate in the well, it would explain to them actually how much they would be on the hook for to participate in the well.
And the Exhibit J, what is this exhibit?
This is the Model Form Standard Operating Agreement. It is used pretty standard practice with all of our wells. It's used by us as an operator. We've also executed as a non-operator with other companies. Obviously, there are points in here that are up for negotiation, but this is a very standard. This is the most standard form that we have.
Okay. Did you send a well proposal packet like this to any of the owners that you identified through your March title opinion at their last known addresses of record, any of your unleased owners?
Yes.
And when were those sent, approximately?
About the middle week of February.
Did any of the unleased owners, or unlocatable owners, I should say, respond to this well proposal packet?
No, not any of the unlocatable owners identified in this hearing.
And so I'm assuming in saying that you're referring to the two folks who have been leased at this point.
That is correct.
So would it be fair to say that you received title status reports, mailed out well proposal packets to those individuals who had identifiable addresses and not to those who you could not track down?
Correct.
Okay. And so the remaining interest, the three identified owners, are the only interest that you're seeking to force pool in this hearing?
That is correct.
Now, if I could have you turn to Exhibit L quickly. I didn't provide a full copy of Exhibit L in the PowerPoint presentation. It has been submitted as Exhibit L in petitioner's cause, or petitioner's exhibits. Do you recognize this exhibit?
I do.
And was this prepared by my office under your direction or supervision?
It was.
Please tell the board what this is really briefly.
This is a copy of the returns of proof of service for the copy of the request for agency action that was sent to each interested party.
And to whom did you mail a copy of the request for agency action in this cause?
Out of caution, we mailed a copy to every party with legally protected interest, including lease mineral owners in the subject well that were determined by the drilling and division order title opinion.
And did you mail a copy to the last known addresses for the three unlocatable owners that we're here talking about today?
No, we did not.
Why not?
Because we didn't have an address that was able to send to them.
So how did you notify the unlocatable owners that are at issue in this hearing of the pending request for agency action?
Pursuant to the board in this cause, we published a notice of opportunity to lease or participate in an oil and gas well. Supplemental notice for request for agency action. This was published in the Vernal Express and the Uintah Basis Standard for 2 weeks straight.
And what's the intent behind doing that?
It's intended to provide notice to the unlocatable owners of the request for agency action and to provide them in another way to lease their interests or elect to participate in the subject well.
Okay. Now, if you could turn to Exhibit M, the affidavits of publication. Do you recognize this exhibit?
I do.
And was this exhibit also prepared under your direction or supervision?
It was.
Please tell the board what this exhibit is.
This is a copy of the affidavits of publication prepared by the Vernal Express and the Uintah Basis Standard, verifying that each published notice of offer to lease or participate in an oil and gas well and supplemental request for agency action for 2 consecutive weeks.
Did you receive any response from the identified unlocatable owners as a result of this notice publishing?
I did not.
Have you received a response from them at any time during this process?
I have not.
Please turn to Exhibit K. And this,
This will be corrected Exhibit K.
thank you, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. I inadvertently included the 2 leases that we had secured through this process in the calculations, which is not in line with the statutes. This is the corrected Exhibit K.
Pardon me.
Could you, do you recognize this exhibit?
I do.
And was this exhibit prepared by my office, again, with your input and review?
Yes.
Please tell the board what this exhibit is.
So this is a calculation on how to arrive at the acreage weighted average landowner's royalty. So the total unit, as Mitch stated, is 1,305.95 acres, but the total acreage used for this calculation was 663.8136 acres.
And why is that?
Because the statute limits landowners' royalty calculation to fee owners are leased prior to commencing of the drilling of the well.
And that it obviously explains the accompanying footnotes at the bottom, why certain leases were omitted from the calculations.
Yes.
Now, could you please, take lease 76 at the bottom there. Could you please discuss the method of calculation used in this exhibit?
Sure. So you take the lease as, for example, we're going to take lease number 76, and then you identify the net acres associated with each lease. So this is 1.7. I guess I have it
It's
better.
080. Maybe?
Yeah. So you take the total net acres, and then you identify the lease royalty that was applicable with lease number 76. In this case, it was a 25% royalty on the lease. And then you calculate the participation factor, and actually the formula is written up there in column 4. And so you divide the net acres under a given lease, so lease number 76, by the total number of leased fee acres in the unit, and then that would give you the participating factor. Sorry.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah. And then finally, we multiply the participation factor determined for each lease, so lease number 76, by the lease royalty applicable to that lease, and we arrive at the weighted royalty for each particular lease.
And then you add up the numbers in the right-hand column, and you get the acreage weighted average landowner's royalty. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what is the acreage weighted average landowner's royalty for the Hicken well?
For the Hicken well, it is 17.13747349%.
Okay, thank you. Now, lastly, Mr. Stone, I'd like to take you to the JOA and go through Exhibit J with you. What form are you using for the JOA in the subject well?
It's the APL Form 610-1989 Model Form Operating Agreement.
And is the use of this form standard practice in the basin?
It is.
In your opinion, are the terms contained therein reasonable and customary in the basin?
Yes.
Are there any modifications from the standard form that are relevant to this hearing?
Yes.
And can you give me an example of these modifications?
Yes. So the non-consent clause, which is going to be on page 13 of the operating agreement, it leaves where it says 200 and 400% that is normally left blank. And in this well, we elected to choose the 200 and 400% risk penalty. The 200% penalty is applicable to all surface equipment beyond the wellhead. And then the 400% penalty is applicable to the actual drilling and completing of the well.
And to remind the board, what risk assessment penalty is Crescent Point seeking in this hearing?
300%.
In your opinion, is this 200, 400 modification reasonable and customary in the basin?
It is.
And has Crescent or would Crescent enter into a JOA that has similar terms as those?
Yes.
Now, could you please turn to Exhibit C of the JOA? I believe it's called the COPUS, the accounting portion. Please tell the board more artfully what this exhibit is.
Sure. So this is the clause that provides for the assessment of interest for late payments for participating in the well.
And does it cover general accounting procedures as far as operating the well?
Yes.
Is this accounting procedure, is this COPUS standard practice, usual and customary in the basin?
It is.
And please look at the third paragraph of Exhibit C. Down at the very bottom, I think it's 3B. It's titled Advances and Payments by Non-Operators. Could you please tell the board what this is and what it means?
So this is the interest rate assessed for any late payment on the well, and is based applicable to the prime rate in effect at the Bank of Nova Scotia, New York agency, plus 1%.
And the purpose of this clause is, I'm guessing, to make sure people pay on time?
Correct.
Now, could you please turn to Section 3 of page 7? And I need to find out where that is. Can you tell the board what this Section 3 titled Overhead, what this section provides?
This clause essentially just deals with the overhead expenses and applicable fixed rates.
And in your assessment, the terms and conditions of the JOA, specifically including those terms in Exhibit C discussed, are those reasonable and customary in the basin?
Yes, they are.
Were you asked by any of the interest owners in this unit, to modify the terms of the JOA that we have discussed here today?
I was not.
With that, Mr. Chairman, the board, I'd be done with Mr. Stone.
Made division.
Okay, thank you. So starting with Exhibit D, that's the spacing order. We kind of touched on the reporting that hasn't happened, but I just had one other question on that order, and that's the expiration, the sort of sunset clause in that spacing order. Just for the record, could you clarify what Crescent Point's position on how that would pan out if that order expired by its terms and it applies to these units?
If I understand the question, are you saying if we force pool a well that may last longer than 5 years, how does that work if the spacing order that governed the drilling of the well expires? Is that a question for Andrew or for me?
For the witness.
Okay.
But I guess if I wouldn't object to you answering it if you wanted to.
I do not know, but I can find out.
Okay. It's more just I guess a curiosity.
My position as the attorney who didn't space it and off the cuff would be that the spacing order governs what wells can be drilled. Once they're drilled, unless there's reworking or additional drilling operations, a spacing unit, in essence, isn't necessary. It's akin to having a license to drive a car, and once you get to the other house, you don't need your license anymore. The spacing order, I know, is important, but as far as changing whether force pooling or the well itself outlasts the spacing order, I'm not entirely sure that I would have much pause.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to some questions with respect to the attempts to locate the unlocatable. I think the request said online searches or something to that extent, but I don't think that you touched on in your questioning the efforts beyond the title work and then the publication with respect to the RAA, or with respect to the request for agency action. But I guess my question is, can you just talk about attempts to locate and serve those people with the offer letter itself?
Well, I guess it was kind of difficult to locate them without having any known address, even of 10 years ago where they might have lived. And so as far as that goes, sending it to their last known address, whether it was, last year or 10 years ago, that was essentially the best we could do with locating where their home was. And then, like stated, the secondary best option was to actually publish these notices for the public to see in hopes. So
When you say these notices, just the notice of the request before the board?
correct.
Okay. And then beyond trying to find them by sending to their last known address, can you talk about what other searches you use to try to find a better address?
So as Mitch touched on, we can request track status reports or TSRs from the BIA, which actually led us to lease some of the people that we initially found as unleased. And then even with requesting those, we still weren't able to locate these final 3 owners.
Okay, thank you. Turning then to the offer letter, Exhibit G. I think your testimony was that the lease was in, or the proposed lease was in the packet that you sent out. Is that your testimony? I guess the letter itself doesn't indicate that it was in there, whereas it does indicate that, like an AFE, for example, was in the packet. But was the lease also included in that packet that was sent out?
Yes, it was.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess a little bit on the timing of that letter. Is there a particular reason why Crescent Point sent that letter out, the well proposal, I guess a year or about a year after the well was producing? What was there? I think I have seen a lot of these that tend to go out before the well is producing. And what was the reason for that timing?
Aside from us doing back-end work, yes, as you noted, it was sent out pretty late after the actual drilling and completing of the well. And although it is sent out later, that money that is actually generated from their percentage is not put into Crescent Point's pockets. It's held in suspense in hopes that we can locate these people. So it doesn't, I don't want it to seem like we are just collecting that money and, using it as our revenue, because that's not true. We're holding it in suspense in hopes that we can find these people. We were also drilling a lot of wells at the time, so we had a lot of these in different wells trying to figure out, the best way to go about it. And then as we stated, the track status reports, we don't have any authority over how quickly we can get those back, which actually turned out to be extremely helpful in finding these people. So unfortunately, those were requested and then not given to us for an extended period of time, which, as stated, helped at least 2 people, not all of them. But it's not standard practice how we would like to do it, and certainly going forward, we are going to look to do whatever we can up front before the actual drilling of the well. But like I said, the money is set aside in case that we can find them.
Right, thank you. Yeah, it was more, I guess, a curiosity just because we've seen it done differently, and I think it does behoove the operator usually to get people to sign up earlier. So more just curious, I guess.
Sure, and I mean, there was definitely an effort made up front. When we had when the abstracts were pulled for the drilling and division order title opinion, there was an attempt initially, and then it's really getting down to the nitty gritty to find the really hard people to find.
Okay, thank you. And one more just short question on that sort of general curiosity about this letter. It sort of seems to put the option to lease is sort of just at the end there as an afterthought. And I think we're used to seeing letters that really sort of put that up front. Is there a reason for the letter being drafted that way?
I don't think it was intentional at all. I suppose I could have put it in a different order and maybe, really touched on that is what we wanted and what we were searching for. And going forward, I will certainly shed more light on that and make that more as the bigger highlight of the letter.
Okay, thank you. Turning to the JOA Exhibit J, please.
I'm working on it. Sorry, Meg. What page are you interested in?
Oh, I can't remember what page it was on. Maybe I don't even necessarily need it up there. My question was with respect to the non-consenting owner's share of the surface equipment. I think your testimony was that the JOA provides for 200% for consenting owners. Can you just clarify for the record what percent you're asking for the board to adopt?
For the surface?
The carrying, the cost of surface equipment.
We've just requested a 300%. If this is about the request itself, we've requested a
Sorry,
300%.
not the non-consent penalty, but you testified that the JOA, the percent of, I don't know if I'm saying exactly right, but 200% for surface equipment. And can you just clarify what you're actually asking the board to adopt a percent for surface equipment for the non-consenting owners?
I don't know that we are. I think it's just a 300% penalty.
I'll just kind of clarify what I'm getting at. The JOA says 200% for, I guess, for the non-consenting owner's share of the cost of surface equipment, but the board can only adopt 100 by statute. So I just wanted to clarify that you weren't asking for the board to adopt more than it could.
That is correct. We were asking for 300% for the actual drilling of the well, so 100% for the surface equipment.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks for that clarification, Meg. Sorry.
Do you guys have anything? Okay, thank you. That's all I have for this witness.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, if not, I'll...
Yeah, I got to ask the board if they have any questions of this witness. Seeing none. You okay, Mr. Moon?
Not that I never hope to understand how the tribal mineral works, so is this quite common then for most of the lands to be held in allotments for specific allottees? Or is it more common to have it just owned by the tribe? Yeah, both?
Yeah, both. So we'll have actual tribal minerals,
Right.
which are separate from these actual allotments. And they're pretty common, especially in, where this subject well is 3 south, 1 east, 4 south, 2 east over here.
And those
These tracks are each allotted tracks, right? They're not...
It's my understanding that there are tribal interests, and then at some point in the early 1900s, there was a counting of the rolls, and anyone who was identified on the rolls received an allotment.
Surface and mineral?
Fee, but held in trust
Okay.
by the tribe for their heirs and devisees going forward. And because there isn't any requirement or obligation for the tribe to record documents in the county recorder's office, keeping track of those minerals is entirely left up to the BIA. Once they have deeded out those minerals at the request of a beneficiary, it oftentimes gets kind of lost in the nether region between the two. I think the fee owners presume that the status quo continues, that the BIA will continue to manage and identify what's going on with their minerals. The BIA, essentially washes their hands of managing that mineral. So
For example, in Tract 1, the heirs of allotment number 687 Monk. What does Monk stand for?
good, you got as good a guess as I do.
So that 73% goes through the BIA, but the other percentages, well, there's some other non-tribal ones apparently, but then the the unlocatable, those you have to try to find that individual.
And I can tell you as a title attorney, part-time, on the side, what you receive is you receive an abstract. And you know that there is no one leasing, you know there is an allotment that covers this area, and you don't see any documents. And then all of a sudden you'll see a lease from the tribe of this area, and it will lease 92.6436524378% of the minerals, and it'll make no mention of the rest. And that is really the only clue that we have as title attorneys that there has been a fee patent given out by the tribe at some point in time. So at that point, what we do is we recognize that as leased, as held by the tribe in trust for that allotment, and that's what you see credited on that first line of Tract 1. They leased that 73%. Somewhere along the line throughout history, they've given out fee interests of certain portions. Some of those have kept track of their minerals, have leased or participated. Some of them just simply get lost. And that's what we end up with Ben Vigil and Bohemia Canapatch. Bohemia was actually locatable, but she has deceased, and her heirs, we don't know which of them get it, which of them are entitled to it, who owns it, if they want to lease, and this has been a 6-8 month process. With Ben Vigil, it was, as my understanding in the title status report, it was sometime in the 60s that he received his interest, and it's a common enough name that there is essentially no way to find even a starting place to begin the search.
Okay. And so the non-tribal names that show up here, are they lessors, or do they actually own them, or?
Both of these, Ben Vigil, Bohemia Canapatch, and Julian Martinez, the three unlocatable owners essentially in this, were all named in the title status reports, which leads me, as someone who's not an expert in this, but it leads me to believe they were tribal descendants and requested at some point in time a fee interest. Don't manage it, just give me my piece and I'll manage it myself. And Julian Martinez is the same. It's a really difficult name to get a starting place to look for title. So,
Just a couple other quick questions. Notice that your service location is within the unit, and typically these long horizontal wells, they're off unit, in order to get an optimum curve.
Sure.
Why? Why here is it within the unit? And did you bend back to get with as close as you could to the setback, or did you just have to give up some ground there?
Sure. I can attempt to answer it, but Mark is an engineer, and he could probably answer it far better. There's a number of reasons. It could have to do with the surface owner to the south of Section 9, which I believe would be Section 16. Couldn't find a good location, either the terrain or no SUA with the surface owner, et cetera. As far as the complexity of drilling this actual well with doing, I'm assuming, a button hook, but I will let Mark go ahead and talk about that.
And then just one final question. This is the first force pulling request in this drilling unit.
Correct.
Is it, have you had other force pulling requests that were the second or third within a drilling unit?
Not as of yet.
Okay, but looking forward, you would like to apply the new.
We did, I did for Crescent Point last year a similar force pooling, and it's an older gentleman who got his interest in the 60s and died shortly after, and his bloodline dies out. We found, I mean, they've spent 5 or 6 years trying to track this interest because it's a sizable interest, and they want to make sure they can get it leased, get it taken care of. They spent a significant amount of time, and it kept coming to the same dead end. Oftentimes, there's not enough money in reserve for the family to justify spending all the cost of probating their 6 uncles they didn't know and their estates. And so it kind of gets to that same block every time. We track down some people at the bottom who may be entitled. We say, you may be entitled to this. We'll help you with costs. I know in that last well, we said we offered to pay for probates. And it was just something where getting all the pieces moving, you'd think that it would motivate people, but it's trickier than it seems.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Having done some of this myself, the difficulty of finding someone who remarries and changes their name, it becomes a black hole. It's really difficult.
Yeah.
Okay, call your next witness, please.
Thank you. Andrew, you can sit down. I'd like to call Mark Ballard. And could you please state your name and business address for the record?
Mark Ballard, 555 17th Street, Suite 1800, Denver, Colorado, zip 80202.
Oh, hi, Mark. Please tell the board your title and your job responsibilities generally, and as they relate to this unit.
Yes, I'm a senior development engineer. My job responsibilities include kind of budgeting, year-end reserve predictions, any acquisition and divestiture opportunities, kind of evaluating those, as well as kind of collaborating with the other teams to kind of push forward kind of permitting efforts in this area.
Okay. And let's turn to Exhibit Q off the bat. This is a breakdown of costs. Do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes.
And was this exhibit prepared by you?
Yes.
Just to be clear, I'm sorry to interrupt you. What exhibit are you on?
We're on Exhibit Q, Mr. Chairman.
You?
I believe so.
I've got that as I beg your pardon.
Did I? Okay.
You're right.
Thank you. I'm sorry, was this exhibit prepared by you or under your direction or supervision?
Yes.
And can you tell the board what this exhibit is and what it shows?
Yeah, so this is meant to show costs associated with drilling a well. So this is meant to show costs associated with drilling the well. The kind of bottom right summary shows the totals, and so there's just kind of a big part of this is just that it's a large investment for us up front. And so there's kind of two cost columns. There's an AFE cost column, kind of a cost prediction, and then our actual costs listed there.
Okay. And the AFE estimated cost for this well, what were those?
So $10,326,805.
And the actual costs exceeded that slightly?
Yes, we were at $10,870,966.
Okay. Collectively, the unlocatable owners, what would their actual costs in the well have been?
Their cost would have been $139,785.51, and that's just taking the actual cost that we spent multiplied by their working interest in the well.
Okay. So the 10,870,000 roughly times by their 1.3% interest in the well.
Yes.
I noticed this exhibit doesn't include a line item for plugging and abandoning the well. Why is that?
Plugging costs we usually don't associate with drilling the well, kind of consider more of a cost of the operation of the well.
So Crescent Point doesn't AFE for plugging and abandoning costs.
Correct.
Would you feel comfortable estimating plugging and abandoning costs for a well like this in the basin, or for this well in particular, I should say?
Yeah, sure. It's roughly $75,000 to plug and abandon and reclaim your pad.
You guys have done that with several wells, and
Yes. Yep.
what would, in your expert opinion, are these well costs, roughly $10, $11 million, and the plugging and abandoning 75,000? Are those fair and reasonable, customary in the basin?
Yes.
And was the subject well deemed economically feasible at the time of spudding?
Yes.
Now I'd like you to turn to Exhibit N as in Nancy, if you could. That's titled the Well Locator Map. Do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes.
And was this exhibit also prepared by you or under your direction or supervision?
Yes.
Could you please tell the board what this exhibit is and what it shows?
Yes, it's meant to show where the horizontal well is in this unit, and then what kind of wells or kind of data points we have in the area that kind of tell us how to drill this well.
It looks like you've got a fair amount of well control close by.
Yeah, so we have to the south and kind of west of the subject well, we have a decent amount of vertical wells, kind of telling us what we expect to see in this well. The risk being here, we don't have data to the east or to the north, so we kind of know where we are in the first half of the mile, then the risk being the second half of the mile, second half of the lateral, which is the second mile of the 2 mile lateral. We don't really know exactly what's out there.
Okay. And are these wells, just to clarify, that are depicted on here, are these all Crescent Point wells, or are some of them operated by other operators?
The majority of the wells are Crescent Point wells.
I'd like you to turn to Exhibit O, if you could, the type log. And do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes.
Was this exhibit prepared by you or under your direction or supervision?
Yes.
And can you tell the board what this exhibit is and what it depicts?
This is a type log that we've shown for other to the board in the past, and this just shows our geologic section. On the left, you can kind of see the log data there. On the right, you can see kind of a more simpler cartoon of what you're looking at. So, typically in the Uintah Basin, in this pool, we're producing out of the Green River and the Wasatch. The well in this DSU was drilled in the Castle Peak, which is the pink label in that cartoon.
And you guys, Crescent Point, I should say, were among the first operators, if not the first operators, to start drilling into the Castle Peak in the basin. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. Newfield does have one Castle Peak well that I believe was drilled before ours, and then 95% of the wells drilled since that time of the Castle Peak wells have been operated by Crescent Point.
Okay. You've cracked the Castle Peak?
That's right.
Yeah. Is it accurate to say that Crescent Point has more experience in a greater number of the strata under the basin than probably any other operator in the basin? Yes,
we've tested drilling horizontal wells in the Douglas Creek, Black Shale, Castle Peak, Ute Butte, and Wasatch. A lot of the other operators in the basin have drilled predominantly Ute Butte or Wasatch wells, and we've done I guess, a better job of kind of exploring the other benches of the kind of Green River and Wasatch Pool.
Exploration comes with increased risk, I would imagine.
Yes.
Have all the Castle Peak wells been successful?
Yes. All the wells have been, successful in paying quantities. The biggest risk that we have with the Castle Peak specifically is kind of the just the way the formation was deposited. So it's more of like a meandering river. It kind of comes and goes as it kind of travels through the acreage. The risk that you'll have is that maybe part of your well will be kind of in that river, and part of it will be outside of it. And one thing that we saw when we were drilling this particular well is towards the end of the lateral, we kind of lost sight of that kind of quality sand that we'd see in the Castle Peak.
So out here where you didn't have as much well control, you kind of lost your way with the Castle Peak a little bit?
That's correct.
And so you would say, or would you say, there was increased risk because of all these factors?
Yes.
Excuse me. Now, lastly, I'd like you to turn to Exhibit P, production. Do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes. Yes.
And was this exhibit prepared by you or under your direction or supervision?
Yes.
Could you tell the board what this exhibit is and what it shows?
So it's a production plot. You've got your rates along the vertical axis and then a date along the horizontal axis. In green, we're showing average oil production. In blue, average water production. In red, it's average gas production. So kind of a big thing with bringing these wells on is you're trying to maximize as much value as you can as early as possible, but there's a lot of risks associated with that. In these wells, we pump a ton of proppant and sand into the wells to kind of stimulate them, and a risk that you kind of run into is bringing back sand production if you try to get kind of maximize rates. So you can kind of see the green line there peaked in May around 1,000 barrels of oil per day. The risk being you could bring back sand production and that could damage all of your downhole equipment. And so it's kind of a risk or reward kind of thing where you try to maximize production and try to live within costs as well.
And that would explain what seems to me to be a fairly steep production curve, the kind of spike quickly down and then settling into a more normal production curve?
Yes.
In your expert opinion, does the combination of the location for the subject well, the stratigraphy under the well, and the abbreviated production curve, do all of these factors increase the risk of drilling this well?
Yes.
And in your expert opinion, again, is a 300% risk assessment, risk compensation assessment justified with respect to this well?
Yes.
With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be done examining Mr. Ballard as well.
Thank you. Division?
With the board's leave, Mr. Dane Doucette would like to ask the witness a question directly.
Proceed.
So on this Exhibit P, just to clarify, this is the production for the subject well, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Board members, any questions? Okay.
Sorry, I've got one, if that's
Oh,
all
I beg
right,
your
before
pardon.
we move on. My question, with respect to the plugging and abandonment costs, the AFE that you provided, I can't remember the exhibit, but the cost sheet that you provided does not include plugging and abandonment estimated costs, but you testified to that verbally rather than providing it in a written form. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Aside from an affidavit saying it, which is essentially testimony written down, there really was no way because Crescent Point doesn't incur plugging and abandoning costs at the beginning, and they don't AFE for those plugging and abandoning costs. So really the only way to get what the estimated plugging and abandoning costs would be for this well is through testimony, either written or oral.
Okay. And then one other question. For future wells in this unit, will those likely be drilled into the Castle Peak as well? Or not sure yet?
Well, yes. Yes, we'll probably drill Castle Peak wells as well as other formations.
Okay. And has this well provided you with any sort of guidance as to that, such that your risk in the future would be less?
Yes. If we were to drill follow-up Castle Peak wells, we might drill them in shorter laterals. Maybe it's instead of a full 2 miles, you're looking at 1.75 miles, just to not kind of, at least if you were to drill a Castle Peak well, not to, so you can kind of stay within the sand for the length of the lateral and then not waste any money on drilling and fracking part of the well that doesn't have that sand quality.
Okay. Thank you. One more question from Mr. John Rogers, if that's all right with the board.
Yes, proceed.
Could we go back to Exhibit P?
Exhibit P, yes, if you'll give me a second.
There's a significant time differential from when this was well drilled and when you're asking for forced pulling. What was the strategy behind that, or why is that?
I'm going to wait to click this box till you're done looking at this exhibit. Oh, it did it on its own. Would you like a hard copy of Exhibit P to look at?
No, that's
Yeah,
fine.
okay.
You just see that the high production, and so it allows those being forced pulled to look at this over a period of time. It seems to your disadvantage.
Yes, that is to our disadvantage.
Let me see if I can find this. Will you ask the question again, John? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Well, usually these, I'm sorry, speak right now. Usually these forced pullings are asked either before or immediately after the well has been drilled. You're about a year out here or more, and it allows a person to look at the production. I'm kind of curious, what was the lag time in allowing this, forced pulling, or your...
Yeah, it's as much me as it is Crescent Point, to be honest. It's a process to get this going. I think a lot of oil and gas operators, their job is operating. Their job is leasing lands, drilling wells, production. It takes a legal advisor or someone interested to say, we need to button things up. There's a back end that we also need to take care of. Crescent Point went through a couple years of really prolific drilling, doing a lot of good work, and there is, I would say, a little bit of a lag in kind of buttoning up the back end of the wells, and that's what we're going through the process of doing. We've got these 2 hearings this month, we've got one next month, and we're hoping to get a couple more in this year, essentially to do what you're saying, kind of button them up sooner and quicker, closer to their production date.
It just allows them an advantage that and I'm just curious if that's a strategy you have, or is just something you're cleaning up then?
Yeah. Sorry. No, it is something that we'd like to wrap up definitely sooner.
Okay. Just was wondering.
Nothing else from me. Thanks.
Thank you. Board members, any questions? Carl? Your mic's not on.
Get my mic on here. There we go. That's better.
Yep.
Ms. Oswald's question, you were about 20% or so over on your AFE, on your actual costs. Could you elaborate a little bit as to why that was? Did you have some unusual problems or mechanical difficulties, and do you expect future costs in this unit to be more like what you spent or more like your AFE?
If I may clarify, I think it's about 5% over.
Is it? Okay.
I don't know for sure.
I think it was 8.2 million, and it went over 10 million in your actual costs, or am I reading something wrong?
Let me see if I can pull it back up and we can all get on the same page. If you look, and this is really difficult to see, I apologize for that, but at the very bottom right column, the AFE estimated costs were $10,325,000, and the drilling costs, the actual costs, were $10,008,000.
Okay.
So about $500,000.
May have been looking at the other exhibit.
No.
Okay, I withdraw my question. 5%'s pretty close.
Yeah, and I mean, excuse me, just to give a little more color on the cost of these wells. Technology is always changing. Sometimes we'll decide we want to perform larger stimulations on the wells, larger fracs, that kind of thing, and that definitely drives costs up significantly. So just kind of depending on kind of the results that we see and kind of the cost benefit kind of gain from different size fracs kind of tells us where our costs will be. So this cost probably is a high end kind of look. Ideally, you can kind of drive those kind of down further.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Let's see, Susan, do you have any questions? We'll finish on this side. Okay, we'll start with, go ahead. Hanson.
Just for my own curiosity, to satisfy that, on Exhibit P, what happened between August and really November of 2017 to the production? Was there a period of time that there was some mechanical difficulties? I'm just curious as to the steep drop off. And
Yeah, there's really it's just a more of a credit of the kind of peak production you had earlier on with technology the way it is today. We can really ramp up production early. So the lift type that we chose on this well is an electric submersible pump, or ESP, that really allows us to draw the pressure down a lot quicker. And so the kind of shape of that profile kind of more alludes to that. And then around October, November, that's the point when we kind of put the well on a pumping unit, which those are a little more kind of prevalent. And so a lot of people are using those. But the deal with that is it's kind of a cheaper way of doing things. Once you put the well back online, you're not quite getting the that kind of flush production. So it's more of a shallower decline, but the cost to produce each barrel is a lot cheaper.
you tried to explain that a little bit earlier. I was thinking you were talking about that shift farther to the left, but I understand now. The other question I had was, you think this was, maybe this is a stupid question. Is this a successful well?
Yes, yeah.
And you see this production, it looks like it's leveling out. You know, it looks like it's going to pay out in what, about 18 months?
We're probably in the 24-month range on something like this.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Moon?
So I was just looking at the detail on in October. It just produced for 12 days, and so it took about 18 days to get the submersible pump down there, and
yeah,
how it works.
Usually, well, part of the issue too that there's another well on this pad, so we were working both wells at the same time, so that kind of doubles your kind of downtime to get the well back online. But usually we'll pull the ESP out, which is kind of not a terribly long process, but a longer process just because you actually, I guess simple way of putting it, you tie electrical cable to the tubing all the way down to where the bottom of the pump is, and so kind of pulling that back out takes a little more time, and then usually for these wells, we'll run in with tubing and kind of clean out the well to kind of clean out any sand bridges or anything like that that may have formed in the well, and then run your new kind of rod pump equipment. So probably the biggest culprit being the 2 wells though on the pad.
So how does is that what it's operating on now? Is it an electrical submersible pump?
It's on rod pump right now.
Okay, it switched over. I was just curious how those, but yeah. So fairly successful well. How does that play into your risk assessment when you already know here a year later that it's a successful well that's going to pay out rather soon? You look at risk assessment as if you didn't know that, or
Well,
how does that work?
if we were here, and this is me speaking not as a witness, but as someone kind of as the statutory opinion, I would say, the risk assessment is judged at the time the money's put on the table.
Right.
And if Crescent Point was able to save their $11 million in well costs until today, I'd agree with you, there's no risk assessment penalty necessary. But, Crescent Point has to chase these undulating sands in the Castle Peak. They have to go through the process. Frankly, every other working interest owner and every other unleased mineral owner had to put forth their costs. And so it's not just a matter of, the time value of money, but it's also just a matter of fairness. I think everyone's costs are determined at the time of drilling the well. Okay. And at that point, no one knows what the success will look like. Success with all horizontal wells is going up, as everyone knows. The chances of drilling a dry hole are few and far between. But the risk assessment, still, when you put that bit in the ground, you don't know what the well is going to look like.
Yeah, agree.
Okay, one more question, might be more for the landman, but does Crescent Point still strongly prefer overlapping spacing? This is drilled in an overlapping spaced area.
Yes. Yep.
And tell me your reasons for that. I can kind of see here where in forced pool or in a pooling, it's nice to have the overlapping spacing so that you don't have to pull in the unlocatables into everything. But why do you like the overlapping?
Will you pull up Exhibit N? The well locator map?
Yes, I will.
So, I mean, really for this purpose, it's helpful. We've got a 1 mile producing horizontal well in Section 4 that's producing out of a different formation, and
Is that this one, Mark?
yeah, that's correct. The Kendall State 14431E, and that was one that we drilled in I think 2014, but that reservoir is maybe more consistent across the whole section, and so it's helpful there to have that on a separate or an overlapping unit with this kind of 1280. Yeah, I think it's just more fair to all the mineral interest owners.
So a concern that's often raised with overlapping is the setbacks and the concern with, within the 2 section unit setbacks. Are you finding those setbacks hindering what you do?
No, not yet. I mean, we're able to kind of test kind of ultimate densities, how closely together we want to drill these wells, and if we ever get to a point where it's starting to kind of impede or kind of delay us there, then we'll kind of come back and kind of talk about our findings, I guess. But yeah.
Do you anticipate any more vertical wells in this area?
Yes. I mean, if you look at the map to the east, sections 3 and 10, there's no vertical wells producing or with decent well logs enough to really know what to expect out there. And so from that purpose, we probably wouldn't feel comfortable putting a horizontal well out there without having a good understanding of what's there geologically. So there is a need for drilling more vertical wells, just to have a few more data points to pick for horizontal targets.
Thank you.
I think you had a question about why it was on DSU. That was mainly permit driven. Originally, these are our fee kind of tribal permits. So the federal permit timeline kind of pushing things out for getting able to permit a horizontal well. And so we ended up drilling or just sundering and converting a vertical permit to a horizontal, and so that's why we went on DSU for this.
Cost you more doing that? I mean, how much did it cost? Did you bend it back and then come in, or?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really have to bend back that far. We were pretty close to within our setbacks. The time value of money in drilling it today is a lot more efficient for us than 2 years out, 3 years out.
Thanks.
Couple of questions. A lot of the other formations that we're seeing out here are overpressured, and so they're producing without a lift and a pump. Tell us what you're finding in terms of pressure with regard to these wells.
Sure. So this well and kind of wells in 3 South 1E in general, we're kind of seeing more normally pressured type of production. Castle Peak wells maybe will still flow for, 2 months thereabouts, and then kind of fall off. But part of the reason for how long you flow a well for kind of depends on how hard you're pulling on it. Like if you open up a pop can and you just kind of barely kind of start to open it, pressure will slowly bleed out. If you open it right away and you get the foam to carbonate out, it's not going to. You don't have that pressure as long because you open it up a lot quicker. But if you kind of if you keep your opening really small, you can get to flow for longer. So it's kind of a production and pressure related kind of concepts, I guess, are related both to reservoir pressure, but also to kind of flow back strategies.
And then my other question is Exhibit Q, has to do with cost. We're seeing about $150,000 for legal fees for finding the title, getting the title straightened out as best you can. What are you finding in terms of not this drilling unit, drilling and spacing unit, but in others? We're seeing about $150,000 on average. How complex did this particular title situation affect your legal fees? And then I don't see legal fees on the costs. How do you handle those?
Is that a question for Andrew, maybe?
Could be.
You want to come on up and then you can participate if you need to.
Just trying, and as you can tell, we're still on the learning curve here, and so a lot of our questions, both the division and the board, are in terms of curiosity to learn about how this particular formation is responding. But this particular drilling unit has about as complex title as we've seen, and so we're trying to learn a little bit from that.
Sure. So I guess in regards to the actual cost and time that goes into it, depending on how complex it is, given this one or some of the other ones that we have, especially in this township, they can take 6 to 8 months just to abstract and actually pull an opinion. Mitch might be able to say better actually how much the costs come in at, since
We've done
Lear and Lear is the ones doing our actual title opinions. So
and they range. I mean, it really depends geographically, even within the basin. Some of them have 2 south, 1 west, 2 south, 2 west, a lot of old production. That typically leads to messier, more complicated, more expensive title. In the past, we did some that were ULT, Utah Land Trust, and they were really quick. One owner, really cheap to get out. And so it really depends on which lands and kind of how creative people have been with their interests since oil and gas were discovered as a commodity to be worthy of keeping in the basin.
I think you may probably answered really my question. It takes 6 to 8 months, 9 months to do a title work in some of these.
We can range from, we've had several dozens of Crescent Point title opinions that have been 2-day, 3-day title opinions. And we have one now that's, I want to say 12 banker's boxes full of documents, and it's just an update. So they range greatly. I would say, estimates of 15,000 to, getting close to 200,000 at the hairiest. So there's a big range in there. I don't see legal fees for that in here either. I do see legal regulatory fees, but that's...
So internally, when the bills come in, they are eventually jibbed out and assigned to each well, and then they are assigned to the consenting working interest parties, and they're part of the actual bill for the well. But a lot of the times there are updates, there are more documents that might come in later on. So we don't actually build it into the authorization for expenditure when it goes out to parties, but it will come back in with, jibs for rental payments on leases or stuff like that, and they'll see it later on.
Okay. And then back to you, Mark. Mark, have you been able to, and if this is proprietary, don't answer it, but kind of get a feeling for return on investment for a Castle Peak well? We haven't seen enough of these to kind of get a feel for what its productivity is. Have you got a feeling for that?
Yeah, I mean, I won't answer that directly, but
Crescent Point's drilled 9 of them?
yeah, we to the time of this well, we had drilled 9 wells, and we continue to drill more than that as we've gone on. So they're definitely kind of meeting our economic hurdles, and something that we'll continue to push and drill Castle Peak well. So
If I were to drill a Castle Peak well, what kind of range of return on investments would I expect to see?
Maybe I'll speak in payouts. Could be easier to understand, but your well cost would pay out anywhere between 1.5 and 4 years, kind of depending on quality of sand and where you're going to drill.
I think that answers my question. Thank you. Okay, with that, anything else?
I'm done with my case in chief. I'd just like to move for admission of the exhibits before the division.
Hey, let's do that now then. I have
Exhibits A through Q.
A through J, corrected exhibit K,
Thank you.
L through Q.
That's correct. And R is the PowerPoint presentation. I never know whether that should be counted as an exhibit or not, but I'm happy to provide a copy.
Let's consider that an exhibit. So that'll include R.
Okay.
Okay, division, any objections?
No objections.
Board members? Okay, those exhibits as corrected are admitted. Okay.
Thank you.
Then we're now to the division.
Okay, thank you. So the division supports this request to the extent that the stipulation with respect to the new statute that we spoke about at the beginning of the hearing. So support the request as long as that part of it is essentially withdrawn until we can do rulemaking. And the only other sort of, I guess, procedural stipulation that I would have is that the the elements of 46.6.5 that are required be included in the order. So they weren't, not all of those elements were explicitly written out in the request for agency action, and the division's preference would be that those are explicitly written out in the order.
Absolutely, yeah.
Noted. Let me ask you, counsel for both sides, make this stipulation clear. We're wondering, since this is our first time, case of first impression for this issue, would it be better if we treated it as a bifurcated hearing so that we kept it alive? Or do we need to do it through a stipulation where what we're saying is the board in and of itself isn't quite ready to address the second issue, and therefore the board would like to bifurcate the issue? Or would you like to do it on a stipulated basis?
You know, honestly, I don't have a preference. What I care about is making sure that Crescent Point's entitled to the same statutory avenues for relief and remedies that everyone else is. We are first, and this is an issue that the board and the division.
And we have no problem with you getting it. It's just the letting us get ready for that opportunity.
I think a bifurcation makes a lot of sense as opposed to a stipulation to withdraw, but it's still available. It really is dependent on the division at this point.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to answer the question without knowing what the rules are going to look like. So I guess, from my perspective, the bifurcated hearing makes sense because it sort of takes out that element of, if the board doesn't get around to making rules, then we're just going to apply this statute, which is it kind of leaves a lot up in the air, in my opinion. So I guess I hadn't thought about it in sort of those terms, but I think it makes sense.
It seems to me that, this hearing is the first request that it applied to future wells, but it almost seems like the second well drilled in this that we attempt to force pool is really the hearing where that decision needs to be made. We're simply asking that this new statute be applied when that time comes, and that time will come once that second well in this DSU has been drilled.
And Mr. Alder, I'd like to hear from you if you're available. I'd like to hear from you too.
I don't like that myself.
Okay, we're ready for you, Mr. Alder.
Thank you. My concern with the bifurcated hearing is it suggests that there would have to be a subsequent hearing. It was my thought, and maybe I didn't think it through clearly, but that this order could provide that the rules as adopted will be incorporated into the final order, and that this statute will apply subject to those rules, with the proviso or the caveat that if rulemaking doesn't successfully conclude, either there isn't rulemaking within the time frame when they drill another well, or the rules are challenged somehow, that then Crescent Point would have the option, since rulemaking is not clearly mandatory, to apply the statute as they think is appropriate. And that, of course, would be subject to another hearing, at which time, or well, maybe it wouldn't, but there will be that opportunity for another hearing. So,
okay, to be clear, we are preserving the issue.
Okay.
And Plan A would be to have rules.
Mm-hmm.
Plan B would be to have one of two courses. One would be an additional hearing, or it could be an opportunity for additional briefing. But at some point in time, this board will need to decide this. We're putting that part of the hearing bifurcated. We're not like we're taking under advisement because we haven't heard all the issues yet. But that issue, for the record, is still alive.
Okay.
And I believe it's the intent of the board to apply that through rulemaking, but that it can still be applied through statute if that has to be the way to go. But we'd like to make sure that we have done everything the board can do to make sure that those unlocatable people have at least the right for some due process steps along the way.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of our intent. Board members, do you feel good about that? Council? Okay, with that then.
Mr. Chairman, if I can ask you kind of a practical question related to
Sure.
that. Assuming this request is granted, how would you like me to address that issue within the order? Do you have any recommendations for how that would be proposed as resolved?
Well, my easy answer is yes. You counsel for the board, counsel for the division, yourself will sit down and work that out. Because it is a case of first impression for the board, and we're in a situation, I think for the record, we have just changed counsel, and we need to give our new counsel time to get up to speed on an issue. On this issue, we will need a little bit of time.
Okay.
When you do prepare the order, it's still subject to the board approving it, and we'll have some input on that. My suggestion then is that working through council, we'll put this one together and see if we can't make it work.
That's fair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll work with you on that. But why don't you go through our council to come up with that language, and then that'll give everyone a time to kind of think about the stipulation method or the bifurcation method, or kind of like letting it go into law without signing that. I don't know what the governor does. We'll work through this.
Okay.
So where we are procedurally then is, I think we're now to the board if they have any final questions, and then we'll come back to you for summation.
That's great.
Any final questions, second thoughts? Okay, then you want to sum up, and
I'm happy to do that. I'll make it brief. In sum, the only interest that we're seeking to force pool in this cause are those of the truly unlocatable owners, Ben Vigil, Bohemia Canapatch, who we understand to be deceased, so her heirs and/or devisees, and the heirs and/or devisees of Julian R. Martinez. According to tribal records, each of these unlocatable owners owns a fee mineral interest in the subject well. Despite diligent efforts, Crescent Point has been unable to locate them or lease them or secure their participation in the well. These interests collectively cover only about 17 net mineral acres, but it constitutes 1.3% of the unit, or of the well, I should say. The unlocatable owners are responsible for paying nearly $150,000 in costs, and Crescent Point has borne those costs up front. The unlocatable owners have received notice of the hearing to the best of our abilities, and we, to date, have received no response or objection, aside from the comment by the person affiliated with the BIA that I mentioned at the outset, ensuring that we weren't seeking to force pool tribal interests. The terms of the JOA and the costs of drilling and plugging and abandoning the well are reasonable and customary in the basin and have been found to be so by this board in the past. And this well has been producing, as the division pointed out, as Mr. Rogers pointed out, for over 15 months, and forced pooling is necessary to finalize this well. Finally, all statutory and regulatory requirements have been met, we believe, and the relief requested in the request for agency action is reasonable and in keeping with standard practice in the basin. With that, I'd submit and ask the board to grant the request. Thank you.
board members, would you like to discuss this further, or is a motion in order?
Chairman, I'm not sure how to phrase the the motion.
I'll rephrase it. You just make
Okay.
it.
I'll propose a motion that Mr. Chairman will presently apply some language to. Does that work for you?
Yeah. I'm going to interpret that as that's a motion to approve the request for agency action.
I'll second that.
Oh, I might get another second. Okay.
Let's do that. Let's get a vote.
Any discussion? Before you today is to approve the request for agency action. I think that's just it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Let the record show that's unanimous.
Thank you.
Appreciate the presentation today. We look forward to more spacing and more well drilling. Mitch, if you would prepare the order,
Happily.
make sure that you list all the elements of the statute, required of the statute, that you note on that the percentage for the surface equipment, and that you propose language in terms of how we deal with the new statutory opportunities that we're going to be applying into this case. And then we'll work with council to, and then present it to council for the division and the board for approval. And also provide in that for the opportunity for additional briefing should the board have additional questions, or should an issue come up that the board needs to be more informed about, if you do that. Is that, any questions on the division on that, how we're proceeding? Okay, with that then, we will take a break. We're intending to take a lunch break if that's available. And so we'll be on a break then. Thank you very much. Appreciate your presentation today.
Oh, thank you very much. You mind if we just leave our stuff set up here? It looks like we're probably next up coming back, so thank
Yes,
you.
please do. We're now off the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You guys, council, you ready?
I am, yes, Mr. Chairman.
It'll be just a second.
Okay.
Back on the record, this is docket number 2018-011, cause number 131-155 in the matter of Crescent Point Energy. Take appearances of council now.
Mitch Mayo of Lear & Lear on behalf of Crescent Point Energy.
Meg Oswald, Utah Attorney General's Office, on behalf of the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining.
Any others? Seeing none, we're back to you, Mr. Mayo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I appreciate your having us back for a second hearing today. Mitch Mayo, as I said, on behalf of Crescent Point Energy. With us today are Andrew Stone, landman at Crescent Point, and Mark Ballard, petroleum and drilling engineer for Crescent Point Energy.
Just for, you've already been sworn. Would you consider yourself still sworn for purposes of this hearing?
I made them tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth at lunch, so yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Stone? And Mr. Ballard, is that applicable for you as well?
Yes.
Is that okay with you, Ms. Oswald? Okay, consider yourself still sworn?
And
then for purposes of administration, Mr. Ballard was admitted as a expert in petroleum engineering at our previous hearing. Any objection to including him as an expert for this hearing?
No objection.
Okay, board members, any problems with that? Okay, we're going to consider you expert for the purposes of petroleum engineering for this hearing, Mr. Ballard.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to reserve admission of exhibits, same as last hearing, till the end of my case in chief.
Yes.
This cause differs slightly from the last in that this involves a standard one-section unit. Targets production from the same formations, the Wasatch and Green River, collectively the subject formations. This drilling unit was also established most recently in the board's order in May of 2017, cause number 131-150. A true copy of the spacing order has been included as Petitioner's Exhibit D in this cause. Pursuant to this order, Crescent Point has drilled and is now producing from the Ute Tribal 2-13-4-2E-H1 well, which wellbore is physically located in and produces from Section 13, Township 4 South, Range 2 East. In Uintah County, Utah, within the Central Randlett Area, we'll refer to this either as the subject well or the Ute well for purposes of this hearing. The subject well began producing on May 19th, 2017, slightly more than a year ago. As previously mentioned, the subject well produces from Section 13, which is a regular 640-acre section, and it's comprised of 6 separate mineral tracts. A unit mineral tract plat depicting these 6 mineral tracts has been submitted as Petitioner's Exhibit E in this cause. Of the 6 mineral tracts in this unit, 4 are Indian, tribal, or Indian allotted lands, and 2, tracts 3 and 4, are owned in fee. There are only 2 fee interests that have not been voluntarily pooled, and those are the mineral interests owned of record by the unknown heirs of allotment number 687 Monk 125 George Ut Powachitz, which is found in Tract 5, and the unknown heirs of allotment number 687 Monk 1A Joseph Arrive, Tract 6. Those are collectively referred to in this hearing as the unlocatable owners. A brief digression for the board. The request for agency action actually included a third allotment in the unlocatable owners. That was the unknown heirs of allotment number 687 Monk 11 Jones Eggleston. During this process and after we'd prepared and submitted our filings, we received a TSR, a title status report from the BIA that demonstrated the ownership of the non-tribal portions of the Jones Eggleston allotment, and those had already been leased of record and were already committed to the well. So those have since been dropped. A copy of unit tract ownership schedules has been submitted as Petitioner's Exhibit F in this cause. The unlocatable owner's interest constitutes only about 0.1% of the drilling unit. After Jones Eggleston interest was taken out, the interest that was subject to forced pooling is significantly smaller. Despite Crescent Point's extensive efforts to locate and lease the heirs to the unlocatable owner's interests, they have proven to be unlocatable. Pursuant to an order of this board, Crescent Point published notice of the opportunity to lease and or participate in the wells and notice of the request for agency action in the Uintah Basin Standard and the Vernal Express, both for 2 weeks. Affidavits identifying these publications are included as Petitioner's Exhibit M in this cause. No party has responded or paid its portion of well costs as a result of these efforts. Thus, Crescent is seeking to force pool the unlocatable owner's interests effective as of May 29th, 2017, the date of first production. Because no interested parties have timely objected to this request, pursuant to the Utah Administrative Code, we would move to enter default against them. Excuse me. In this hearing, Crescent Point seeks to apply terms of the JOA and the acreage-weighted average landowner's royalty to the minerals at issue. The terms of the applicable JOA have been determined to be just and reasonable by this board in past hearings, including in the hearing this morning. This board has jurisdiction over this cause pursuant to Utah Code 40-6-6.5, and notice was provided to all interest owners at their last known addresses of record and by the publication of notice where an address of record was not available. Petitioner's Exhibit L contains photocopies of the certified mailing receipts mailed in this matter, and the responses, if any, thereto. With that, I'd like to begin my examination of Mr. Stone.
Proceed.
Mr. Stone, would you please state your name and business address for the record, please?
Andrew Stone, Crescent Point Energy U.S. Corp., 555 17th Street, Suite 1800, Denver, Colorado, 80211.
And what is your current position with Crescent Point?
I'm a landman covering the area for the subject well.
And are you assigned to the Ute tribal well?
I am.
Do you exercise a supervisory role over the land records associated with this well?
I do.
And could you please provide the corporate and bonding status one more time for Crescent Point?
Crescent Point is a Delaware corporation with its principal business in Denver, Colorado, and Crescent Point is bonded.
Now let's turn to Exhibits B and C, if we could. First, the pooling unit locator map and the well survey plat. Do you recognize these exhibits?
I do.
And were these prepared by you or under your direction or supervision?
That is correct.
Exhibit B, let's turn there first. Pooling unit locator map. Can you orient the board and help them understand where this section is in relation to the surroundings?
Yes, so the outline drilling and spacing unit will be there in gold. This is in Township 4 South, 2 East. You can see the town of Array down to the southeast, approximately 4 miles. And the town of Randlett is to the northwest, maybe 7 to 8 miles.
Okay. And Exhibit C, the well survey plat.
This is, again, a pretty standard well survey plat. It was completed under the direction of us by a third-party company. They do all of our well survey plats. For the purpose of this one, you can see the surface well location being the black dot with the diamond around it in the northwest of the northeast corner of Section 13. And the well will be drilled down from north to south to the southwest of the southeast quarter of Section 13.
Thank you. Now, turning to Exhibit E, the unit mineral tract plat. Do you recognize this exhibit as well?
I do.
And what is this exhibit?
This is a unit mineral tract plat. It's prepared with our drilling and division order title opinion by Lear and Lear. This particular plat is representing Section 13 of Township 4 South, Range 2 East. And each tract is representing common ownership. For this one, there are 6 different unique tracts. At the bottom, you can see how many acres are contributed to each tract. And for the purpose of today, we are going to be referencing tracts 5 and 6, so the red and blue tracts.
That's right. So here and here, if I'm not mistaken. And just to be clear for the record, was this prepared by you or under your supervision or direction?
Correct.
Okay. Exhibit F, tract ownership schedule. If you could turn to that. Do you recognize this exhibit?
I do.
And was this also prepared by you or under your direction or supervision?
It was.
What does this, these ownership schedules, what do they demonstrate?
So to start it off, it just at the top, it will give a brief description of what lands we're talking to. So for example, Tract 1, this is 4 South, 2 East, Section 13, lots 4, 5, 8, 9, east half of the northeast, northeast of the southeast, containing approximately 249.465 acres. Below it, you'll see the mineral ownership breakdown, which will add up to 100% contributed to this tract. And then below that, it will have the leased and consenting parties, which in this tract, they are all or both are leased and consenting. And then below that, it will have the unlocatable and non-consenting parties, which there are none for this particular tract.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Moon asked a question in the prior cause, and I'd just like to point it out because it's here so visible. In Tract 1, you can see this is a tribal interest, and this is the division as it looks when it's a tribal. In Tract 2, you can see the allotment. It really depends on how much of that mineral interest has been deeded out, but 100% of it is held in that allotment for the benefit of the trustees, the beneficiaries.
So, on the allotment, do you...
You're not, your mic's not on.
On that allotment, do you write, is that one royalty payment, or is that a whole bunch of royalty payments?
It's my understanding that it's one royalty payment.
One, okay.
Correct.
So here you just have two. Okay.
That's right. How were the ownership interests, these tract ownership schedules prepared? Jump down about 5 or 6 down.
They were prepared along with our drilling and division order title opinion by Lear and Lear.
Okay. And when was that opinion last completed or updated?
That was effective March 23rd of this year, 2018.
Okay. And what did that March 2018 title opinion conclude with respect to the mineral interest as identified in the tract ownership schedules?
That concluded that there a portion of the two tribal allotments, Monk 125 and Monk 1-A, are owned in fee and unlocatable.
And so tract 5, we have Monk 125 represented. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And at the bottom, you see the unknown heirs of allotment number 687, Monk 125, George at Powachitz. Is that the interest to which you're referring?
That is correct.
And track 6, similarly, we have 687 Monk 1A, Joseph Arrive. And at the bottom, identified are the unknown heirs of allotment number. Is that?
That is also correct.
In the request, as we stated briefly, but just for the record, you also included a third allotment, I should say, Jones Eggleston, and that is not included today. That is not something you're seeking to force pool. Why is that?
Because we were able to locate and sign a lease.
Okay. Now, if we could briefly turn to Exhibits J through G, these collectively constitute a well proposal packet. But if you could walk through those briefly. Well, first of all, do you recognize these exhibits?
I do.
And were these all prepared by you or under your direction or supervision?
They were.
And they're official business records of Crescent Point?
Correct.
Were they prepared in the ordinary course of business?
Absolutely.
And what do these exhibits collectively demonstrate?
Collectively, they make up the well proposal packet, which we send to all unleased mineral owners.
Including any unleased mineral owners in the Ute well, is that correct?
Correct.
Now let's go through just briefly, maybe one sentence on each. Exhibit G.
Sure. So this is just the introduction letter to the well proposal packet, and it lays out the different options that this particular owner has in the subject well.
Okay. And H?
This is the oil and gas lease that is also included in the well proposal packet. There are blanks left open for negotiation if we were to hear back.
Okay. Exhibit I, titled Authorization for Expenditure.
Yes, so, and this is also included in the well proposal packet. It sums up the drilling and completing of the subject Ute well.
And then Exhibit J.
Exhibit J is going to be the joint operating agreement that is also included in the well proposal packet. Should the unleased person choose to participate in the well or lease, they would also need to execute the JOA.
Okay. In this instance for the Ute well, did you send a well proposal packet like this to the unlocatable owners at their last known addresses of record?
Yes.
And to whom did you send those?
Oh, sorry. No, we do not have the address for those unlocatable owners.
Okay. Did you mail a well proposal packet to anyone else during this preparation for forced pooling hearings?
No.
Okay. Exhibit L, turn to that if we would, and that is the proofs of service. Again, this entire exhibit was omitted from this PowerPoint presentation for space, but this is a sample. Was this exhibit prepared by my office?
Yes, it was.
Under your direction and supervision, of course.
Yes.
And please tell the board what this exhibit is.
This is just a copy of the returns of proof of service for the RAA that was sent to each interested party in action.
Okay. And to whom did you mail a copy of the RAA, the request for agency action?
We did not mail it because we couldn't find an address for these owners.
And I may need to take a quick second. It looks like I've got to plug in my computer. I apologize. And as you said, you didn't.
So apologies on that last question. These are proofs that were sent to all owners within the subject well that we gathered from record title, which was included in the drilling and division order title opinion.
Okay. And did you mail a copy to the of the request for agency action to the unlocatable owners in this hearing?
No.
And why is that?
We could not locate an address.
And how did you notify then the unlocatable owners of this pending request for agency action?
We published a notice of opportunity to lease or participate in an oil and gas well. We put this in the Vernal Express and the Uintah Basin Standard for 2 consecutive weeks.
Okay. And that was pursuant to an order of this board, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, turning to Exhibit M. Do you recognize this exhibit, Mr. Stone?
I do.
And what is this exhibit?
This is a copy of the affidavits of publication prepared by the newspapers that were referenced earlier, the Vernal Express and the Uintah Basin Standard. And they are published to notice the offer to lease or participate in oil and gas wells, supplement a request for agency action for 2 consecutive weeks.
So this is essentially proof from the newspapers that you published the notice of request for agency action.
Exactly.
And that's how you provided the unlocatable owners with notice, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you receive a response from the unlocatable owners to this?
I did not.
Have you received a response from them at any time during this process?
I have not.
Okay. Exhibit K, please. And this is the acreage-weighted average landowner's royalty calculation, as it's titled on the slide. Do you recognize this exhibit?
I do.
And this was prepared by my office with your input and review, is that correct?
That is correct.
And so please tell the board what this exhibit is and what it demonstrates.
This lays out the calculation on how we create the acreage-weighted average landowner's royalty. The actual total unit size for the subject well is 640 acres, but the total acreage used for this calculation is 190.7432 acres.
Okay. And you used 190.7432 because the statute limits landowner's royalty, as in the last hearing, to leased fee or privately owned and/or those leases that were entered at the time drilling commenced. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And for the record, let's identify that exhibit as corrected Exhibit K.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Now, could you please just take lease number 7, for example, and discuss the method of calculation used? The board's probably familiar with it.
Sure, yes. So you take the net mineral acres under each lease, and then you identify the lease royalty applicable with that lease and those net acres. And then we calculate the participation factor by dividing the net acres. Actually, you can see the formula in the fourth column. But you take the net acres under each given lease and divide that by the total number of leased fee mineral acres in the unit. And so it is written there in column 4.
Okay. And then,
and then finally, you multiply the participation factor determined by each lease, or for each lease by the lease royalty applicable to the lease, which gives you the average weighted landowner's royalty.
and you add those up, you get the acreage weighted royalty for the the unit. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what is the acreage weighted royalty for this unit?
It is 18.104609%.
Okay. Now, I'd like to go back lastly and briefly just hit through a couple provisions of the Exhibit J, the Joint Operating Agreement. What form are you using for the JOA and the subject well?
We're using the AAPL Form 610-1989 Model Operating Agreement.
And this form is fairly standard practice in the basin?
Yes, it is.
In your opinion, the terms, the standard terms contained therein are reasonable and customary in the basin?
Yes, they are.
And are there any modifications from the standard form that are relevant to this hearing?
Yes, there are a couple. The non-consent clause, which would be on page 13 of the operating agreement, and this would be a blank space normally, and we entered in 200 and 400%, and these would be the non-consenting penalty percentages. The 200% would be applicable to all surface equipment, and the 400% penalty would be applicable to the drilling and completing of the well.
And to be clear, what risk assessment penalty is Crescent, or should I say more accurately, what risk assessment penalties are Crescent Point seeking in this hearing?
So we are seeking a 100% for surface equipment use and then a 300% for the drilling and completing of the well.
Okay. In your opinion, are these modifications, the 200, 400% modifications in the JOA, are those reasonable and customary for Crescent Point's operations?
Yes, they are.
And has Crescent Point or would Crescent Point enter into a JOA with similar terms as those detailed?
Yes, we would.
Now, if you could turn to Exhibit C of the JOA, it's called the COPUS. Excuse me. Can you please tell the board what this Exhibit C is and what its function is in a JOA?
Sure. So Exhibit C of the JOA deals with all accounting procedures it goes anywhere from actual interest rates or how to calculate a late payment for entering into the well.
Okay. I'm assuming there's an accounting procedure similar to this contained within every JOA in the basin?
Yes.
Okay. And is the use of this Exhibit C reasonable and customary in the basin?
It is.
Okay. If you could look down at the third paragraph titled Advances and Payments by Non-Operator, and 3B, just below that. Can you tell the board what this clause is, what it means?
Yeah, this clause provides assessment for interest on late payments for entering into the well.
Okay. And how are those interest rates calculated under the JOA?
The interest rate assessed for late payment for the well is based on the applicable prime rate in effect at the Bank of Nova Scotia, New York agency plus 1%.
Okay. And the purpose of this is to ensure timely payment?
That is correct.
Now, could you please turn also to, finally, I should say, to Section 3 on page 7 of Exhibit C. It's titled Overhead. Can you tell the board what this Section 3, titled Overhead, what this provides in the JOA?
So this deals with all overhead expenses that go into drilling and completing the well and any applicable fixed rates.
Okay. And in your assessment, the terms and conditions of the JOA, specifically including the terms that we've addressed in Exhibit C of the JOA, are all reasonable and customary in the basin?
Yes.
And were you asked by any of the interest owners in this unit to modify the terms of the JOA that we've discussed here today?
I was not.
Okay. And with that, board, I'd be done with Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Division.
Thank you. I will just, I guess, I would have a lot of the same questions as I did in the last matter with respect to the spacing order and the efforts to locate the unlocatable parties and the offer letter, but I'll forego those just under the assumption that the board has just heard those and decided on those. So I'll skip that and just ask the things specific to this if that's okay with the board.
Can assume the board has taken that as notice.
Thank you. Okay, so turning to Exhibit F, the tract number 6.
Exhibit F, Tract 6.
If you could just explain, I mean, I could probably guess why it is the way that it is, but if you could just explain why the heirs of Joseph Arrive are, in some cases, locatable and not seeking to pool those heirs, and then in other cases you are. So it seems that some heirs are Crescent Point seeking to pool and others not.
So we are seeking to lease and pool all of them. It's just that 1.049383% of this allotment were actually just unknown, and we could not locate them to get a lease. And the remaining 98.950617% were.
Okay. So logistically, does that mean that like the probate was done so you could find and account for some of them, but
Well, let me jump in with the BIA process. The BIA will issue a lease. They'll tell you they have mineral interest. They'll confirm a mineral interest in an area, and they'll issue a lease. And when they write in the lease terms, what it says is essentially, we lease the entire, in this case, southwest northeast quarter of Section 13, less and accept 1.049383624375%. That's all that's shown of record. And so the BIA has claimed ownership of and leased 98.56%. The remaining 1.05, the BIA has a cursory record of where that has gone since then. By way of prelude to your answer, I apologize.
okay.
Does that make sense? Does that satisfy, Meg? I'm sorry. At that point, we know that there's 1% that is unleased, and the only way to find out and lease that 1%, which is something that all operators want to do, they want to lease up all the acreage, is to get the BIA to give a title status report that identifies who these owners are that received fee interests. Getting those is difficult at times.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm tracking. I think I was just hung up on the same group of heirs being sometimes
One of them are-
locatable and other times not, but
Yep.
we can move on from that. I guess just one point of clarification on that. Did Crescent Point, when you were doing your title work, did you have the names of those unknown heirs and you just couldn't find them, or did you just know that there were some heirs that you couldn't even find the names for? That makes sense. I guess
yeah.
I'd prefer the witness to answer the question if possible.
Well, he didn't prepare the title opinion, though, so it might be difficult.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll just withdraw the question because I don't think, I mean, we can't have someone who's not sworn answering all the questions, so I'll just withdraw that. It was more just a curiosity kind of question.
To the extent their curiosity, I think I'm qualified to answer. To the extent their testimony, I agree. I won't answer, but.
Okay. Well, I'll let, if the board wants to follow up on it, I'll let them do that, and I'll move on for my purposes, I guess. Just a clarification question on the JOA. What is the purpose of filling in the percentages that are different percentages than those you're asking the board to adopt?
Can you restate the question?
So the JOA that you've submitted as an exhibit has, your council pointed you to a couple of blanks that have been filled in, specifically the surface equipment and the non-consent penalty, and I appreciate the clarification that of the percentages that you're asking the board to adopt, but I'm just a little hung up or confused on why the exhibit you've submitted itself has different numbers than those that you're asking the board to adopt?
I mean, sometimes a 200 and 400% penalty can be seen as more harsh or stern. Not to say that we haven't executed as a non-operator with those same penalties. I just didn't think that it was necessary to actually enforce a 200 and 400% penalty. I thought that 100 and 300% would be just fine.
Okay, so is the 200 and 400% that is in the exhibit that you've submitted just to demonstrate what other parties in what the consenting parties have agreed to? Is that the purpose of putting those there?
Correct, and
Okay.
possibly not even consenting for this well, but for other wells that we have proposed and participated in. So.
Okay, and so if this JOA were to apply down the road to future wells, would you be asking the board to apply the 200 and 400 or the 300 and 100%?
We would keep it consistent and apply the 100, 300.
Okay, thank you.
Obviously, pending any statutory changes, I mean, 100% is statutorily fixed, and if it was increased to 200%, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't pursue that.
Right. I was just trying to clarify the purpose for having different numbers in the exhibit itself than what are actually being requested.
Well,
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for this witness.
Board members, any questions of this witness? Go ahead. Davis.
On Exhibit K,
Your mic's not on.
can we go to Exhibit K?
yes, I'd be happy to. 1 second. Takes me a few minutes to figure out where I'm at.
Corrected Exhibit K.
Corrected Exhibit K.
Corrected
yes.
Exhibit K, yes. Column 3 is lease royalty. The lease royalty amount is different for different lease numbers. Why is that?
So when negotiating a lease, those different owners just happen to be more stern or wanted a lower or higher royalty than others. We leave that open for negotiation. As an operator, we would want the lowest possible royalty, of course. Sometimes lessors want, a higher royalty or a lower bonus, or vice versa. Every owner is a little bit different.
Thank you.
Yep.
Wants to know who got that 25% on that last, it was earlier today.
Yeah.
It was a company.
Is it? Okay.
Any additional questions? Okay, then, call your next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd finish with Mr. Stone, but I'm actually just going to have him scoot over to the seat next to me just in case there's some follow-up that needs to go both ways. I'd like to call Mr. Mark Ballard as my next witness.
Proceed.
Mr. Ballard, could you please state your name and business address for the record one more time?
Mark Ballard, 555 17th Street, Denver, Suite 1800, and that's in Denver, Colorado, zip 80202.
Okay. And would you please tell the board your title, your job title, and your job responsibilities generally?
Yes, I'm a senior development engineer. My job role includes budgeting, kind of team collaboration, as well as working through the A&D activities.
Okay. Excuse me. Now, if we can turn to Exhibit Q, entitled Costs. And members of the board, I'd like to point out, when initially submitting these, we may need to submit a corrected Exhibit Q. We had identified the same heading. We had the Ute tribal or the HICKEN tribal information at the top there. The numbers were accurate. I have corrected it for the visual exhibit here, but I believe that Exhibit Q in the files is misidentified at the top. If the board would like us to submit a corrected exhibit, I'm happy to do that. If not, Mr. Ballard can correct it on the record and we can move on.
Let's correct it on the record.
Okay. Is this, do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes.
And was this prepared by you or under your direct supervision?
Yes.
Did we submit an earlier version of this that had a different heading?
Yes.
What was that?
Instead of 21342EH1, it said 159431EH1. So now it's correct as you see on the screen.
And can you testify that these are the correct AFE and actual costs associated with the Ute tribal well?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Any further clarification or correction requested, or?
Oh, that's fine. Vision, any objection? Okay,
Thank you.
so corrected.
Can you tell this board what this exhibit shows?
Yes, this is meant to show AFE estimates as well as actual costs that we saw in this well. Similar to the last well that we'd gone through. It's a expensive cost, and it's something that there's a lot of risk kind of going into drilling a well. You can see that our AFE cost was just shy of $5.7 million, and our actuals came in just over that $5.7 million. If we were to look at the unlocatable interest owners, that cost would be, or that they would owe would be $6,809.26. Again, that's just taking our kind of actual cost multiplied by their small ownership.
And this exhibit doesn't include a line item for plugging and abandoning the well. Could you remind the board why that is?
Again, similar to the last well, we don't include P&A costs in with this initial AFE. That's more of a kind of a cost of the operation, that kind of thing. Typically, a plug-in cost is around $75,000.
Okay. And in your expert opinion, are these costs of drilling the well and the plugging and abandoning costs fair and reasonable and necessarily incurred?
Yes.
And was the subject well deemed economically feasible at the time of spudding?
Yes.
Okay, now Exhibit N, briefly, the well locator map. Do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes.
And was this also prepared by you or under your direction or supervision?
Yes.
Can you please tell the board what it is and explain what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so the green arrow, the subject well that we're looking at in section 1342E, really showing that there's not a ton of wells surrounding it. There's a well directly to the north of it that was drilled prior to this one, but for the most part, we don't have a ton of vertical wells to really tell us where to drill this well. Kind of adding a little more risk to the game, and makes it a little more difficult to pick the right place to drill this.
Okay. And there's a bunch of wells, to put it in legal terms, identified on this map. Are all of them, a portion of them, owned, operated by Crescent Point?
Only
rough percentage.
Yeah, that 30% of the wells are operated by Crescent Point. The wells to the west are Crescent Point operated, and the wells to the east of the Meridian line are operated by other companies.
Okay. And clearly the subject well is I think we've addressed that. Turning to Exhibit O, the type log. I know we just went through this, but for the purposes of this cause, do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes.
And was this exhibit prepared by you or under your direction or supervision?
Yes.
Can you tell the board what this exhibit is and what it's designed to show?
You're looking at a type log here just to get a feel for the geology of the area. On on the right, you've got a small cartoon representing which wells or which formations have been our primary horizontal targets or have been produced. The subject well is a Castle Peak well, but we've drilled horizontal wells in all of the, or a lot of the other zones in Douglas Creek, Black Shale, Castle Peak, Uintah, and Wasatch.
Okay. And that the scarcity of wells in those zones, I'm assuming, increases the risk in drilling in those zones.
Yes.
And now exhibit. Let me make sure. Exhibit P, if we could. Production. Do you recognize this exhibit, Mr. Ballard?
Yes.
And was this also prepared under your direction or supervision?
Yes.
Can you tell the board what this exhibit is and what it shows?
Yes, this is a production profile for the graph. There's three colored lines on the graph. Green is the average oil production, blue is average water production, red is average gas production. You can see that after a period in time, a couple of months, this well kind of peaked kind of north of 600 barrels a day, and then kind of declined after that point. Again, this is kind of different kind of flow back strategies for different wells. The biggest risk here is something we talked about last time too. It's just kind of bringing in sand production when you kind of see those peaks in production.
Okay. And is this you testified before in the Castle Peak in causes before the board that one of the methods with approaching a Castle Peak well for Crescent Point is often kind of jamming production off the outset. Is that a fair assessment of kind of a description of this production curve?
Yes.
And that increased production at the outset comes with increased risk, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's correct.
And what are some of the risks of jamming production at the outset?
The biggest risk kind of being that you might, I wouldn't say lose your well, but you might plug it off with incoming sand production, that kind of thing, and you'd have to stop producing for a week or two, and then run in hole with drill bit and kind of clean out the inside of the casing and clean out all the sand out of the well. So it's kind of a give and take kind of process, but that's one of the risks you run.
Okay. And in your expert opinion, does the newness of the location, the relative lack of well control, the stratigraphy under the subject well, and this kind of stunted, peaked production curve increase the risk of drilling for the subject well?
Yes.
In your expert opinion, is a 300% risk compensation assessment justified with respect to this well?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, with that, I'm done with Mr. Ballard.
Thank you. Division?
I don't think we have any questions for this witness. Thanks.
Board members?
Why did you stop at 1 mile?
We don't have enough interest to the south to operate the section in the south as well.
Questions? Okay, then seeing none, let's go back to you for admission of exhibits.
With that, I'd be done presenting my case in chief. Exhibits A through J, corrected Exhibit K, and exhibits L through Q, with Q being corrected on the record.
We're going to call that amended Exhibit Q. Okay. And then we're also going to include Exhibit R.
That's right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any objection to those?
No objection.
Board members? Okay, those exhibits are admitted. Then we are to, before we go on any further, let's get a couple things clarified. I want to confirm the same stipulation or bifurcation from the past request order in docket number 131-154 will be applied to this hearing and to this request for agency action, in this case, cause number 131-155. Also for the record, we want to note that the reporting requirement under the pilot projects has not been submitted, and that the time has elapsed, and that you may need additional time for an extension.
Appreciate that, Mr. Chairman.
And with that, then, we will go to the division for any comments on what I just said and for the division's position.
The division would support the request, subject to the same stipulations that we expressed in the cause before this one. So, subject to the agreed upon application of the statute or lack of application of the statute, and the specific terms required by 46.6.54 being included in the order.
Okay, back to you for waiving summation.
I would like to waive summation, Mr. Chairman,
Thank you. Board
please.
members, any questions on that? Then a motion is in order, or to discuss this?
I move we approve this request for agency action.
A second? Second. Any discussion? The motion before you is to approve the request for agency action as submitted, subject to the stipulation and subject to further reporting under the pilot projects. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Let the record show that that was unanimous. Thank you very much. We hope to see you again soon,
Thanks a lot, Mr. Chairman.
at least next month. And then, Mitch, will you prepare the order?
Happily.
In the same sort of understandings we had from the last.
We'll get one figured out and apply it to all. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay. How long are we going to need to set up for the next hearing? This will be, board members, this will be a hearing by teleconference. And so the question is, can we take a 5 or 10 minute break?
10 minutes or so.
10 minutes? Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break. Council, are you ready?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, your mic's not on, your mic's not active.
Test, there we go.
Okay. You ready? Okay. We're back on the record. Agenda item number 3, docket number 2018-012, cause number 269-03, in the matter of Wolverine Gas and Oil Company of Utah. We'll take appearances of counsel.
Fred McDonald of McDonald and Miller on behalf of Wolverine.
And Steve Alder with the Utah Attorney General's Office for the Utah Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining.
Thank you.
Can you see us okay?
And any others? Seeing none, we are to you, Mr. McDonald.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wolverine, you guys can hear us okay? Okay, do we have audio with them, Paul?
Yes, if you'd ask them to address this again, please.
Okay, can you speak into the mic one more time, Richard? Yeah, we're not having the audio right now. Hang on a second. Okay, Richard, can you speak into the mic again? Yeah, we're still not getting the audio. Try it one more time, Richard, if you can.
Okay, we're off the record for a minute. Just double check that.
It worked earlier.
Who stepped on the wrong cord?
Nope, still not coming through.
Fred, can you hear us now?
There we go. Yes, that
All
works.
right.
Loud and clear. Can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we're back on the record. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you. Our witnesses today on the left of the screen for the board is Mr. Ed Higuera, who is the Exploration and Engineering Manager for Wolverine. In the middle, we have Richard Moritz, who's the Vice President of Land. And on the right, we have Emily Hartwick, who's the Manager of Geology. And all three will be testifying today. I would ask that they be sworn as witnesses at this time.
Proceed.
Will you raise your right hands? You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen of the board, the resumes of all three witnesses were collectively submitted as Exhibit A in this cause. If separately and individually asked about the contents of their respective resumes, the witnesses would confirm the same. All three were recognized by the board as experts in the fields of petroleum land management, geology, and petroleum engineering in cause number 26901 back in 2010. However, Mr. Moritz will be testifying today only as a fact witness. Based on their previous recognition in the resumes and presuming the division has no objections, we ask that Ms. Hartwig and Mr. Higuera again be recognized as experts in geology and petroleum engineering respectively for purposes of this cause.
The division has no objections.
Board members, they are so admitted as the experts in geology and in engineering for the purposes of this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to confirm that the board received the supplement to Exhibit Z, which is the additional return receipts that was filed on Monday.
Yes,
And then also I will be moving for our exhibits at the end of our presentation in chief.
that's our preference.
All right. I'll be brief in my opening remarks. As the board is probably aware, Wolverine operates the Wolverine Federal Unit in San Pete and Sevier counties. The unit was originally approved in 2003 and contracted down to its 2 existing participating areas in 2012. Other than an order approving enhanced recovery operations in the Providence participating area of the unit, there are no other board orders pertaining to the unit. As such, the current status is that the general operational rules, and in particular the well siting rule at R 649-3-2, have and still remain applicable in the unit area. Wolverine has drilled all its wells in accordance with approved APDs, some of those being exception location approvals. However, as the testimony today will reflect, data developed from the existing development and seismic interpretation have confirmed faulting, particularly in the Covenant participating area of the unit, which will require future wells to be located on a tighter density pattern and outside of the regulatory limitations of Rule 649-3-2, and in most cases will also require directional drilling. As the board is aware, Rule R 649-2-3 allows suspension of the general operational rules as to lands within federal approved units, and the board has granted this relief on numerous other occasions, the most recent being in 2016 with respect to the South Redwash unit, which was cause number 187-11. A true and correct copy of Rule R 649-2-3 was submitted as Exhibit B in this cause. Units allow for the most efficient and economic manner of exploration and development because the unit operator can develop on the basis of reservoir characteristics and not based on some arbitrary spacing or well siting pattern. Rule R 649-2-3 recognizes this and allows suspension of existing board rules as to a federal unit so long as the conservation of oil and gas and the prevention of waste are accomplished thereby. The evidence presented today will show that the Wolverine Unit Agreement and operations conducted pursuant to its terms are intended to and do accomplish the conservation of oil and gas and the prevention of waste. There are a couple important caveats to Wolverine's request. To protect correlative rights, Wolverine agrees that no well may be drilled closer than 460 feet to a unit boundary without an exception location approval. Also, the requirement to provide a directional survey as to any directional drill well remains in place as well. The board has jurisdiction pursuant to Utah Code Annotated 40-6, subparagraph 53B, and Utah Admin Code Rule R 649-2-3. A copy of the request was sent via certified mail to all owners within the unit area, to the Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, since a state lease is committed to the unit, and to the Bureau of Land Management, both at the Utah State Office and the Richfield Field Office, as federal leases are also included in the unit area, and the BLM is the supervising agency over the unit. All of these were sent to the last addresses disclosed by the relevant agency and county records, as well as Wolverine's internal records, and all of those owners were confirmed to have received the request. Notice of the request in this hearing was also published in the Salt Lake Tribune and Deseret Morning News on July 1st, 2018, and in the San Pete Messenger and Richfield Reaper on July 5th, 2018. No objections or other responses have been filed, and the division elected not to submit a memorandum in this cause. With that, I'll commence my examination of Mr. Moritz. Mr. Moritz, would you please state your name and business address for the record?
Yes, Richard Moritz, 1 Riverfront Plaza, 55 Campout, Northwest, Grand Rapids, Michigan, 49503.
And what is your position with Wolverine?
Vice President of Land.
And do you have supervisory capacity over the land records pertaining to the Wolverine unit?
Yes.
Okay. For the record, would you please state the corporate and bonding status of Wolverine?
Yes. Wolverine is a Michigan limited liability company with its principal place of business in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It is a wholly owned subsidiary of Wolverine Gas and Oil Corporation. Wolverine is duly qualified to conduct business in the state of Utah and is fully and appropriately bonded with all relevant federal and state of Utah agencies.
Okay, for the board's reference, would you provide a very brief history of the Wolverine unit?
Yes. The unit was originally approved effective July 28, 2003. All formations underlying the unit area are deemed unitized. Although the unit encompassed as much as 70,144 acres at one time, effective as of March 16, 2012, the unit contracted down to its two existing participating areas. The initial Navajo 1 Formation Carbon Sequestration Participating Area, also known as the Providence Field, comprised of the subject Sanpete County lands, and the 7th Revised Navajo Participating Area, also known as the Covenant Field, comprised of the subject Sevier County lands. The board certified the Providence Field as an enhanced recovery project utilizing gas reinjection by order entered in cause number 269-02 on December 31st, 2013. Wolverine serves as unit operator. The majority of the oil and gas in the unit area is owned by the United States with some fee and sitla ownership. All are under lease, and all leases are commonly owned by Wolverine Gas and Oil Corporation and its partners. All tracts are deemed fully or effectively committed by the BLM. There are no uncommitted unit tracts.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you to refer to what have been marked as Exhibits C through E for purposes of this cause. Were those exhibits prepared by Wolverine personnel with your input and review?
Yes.
Okay, turning your attention now to Exhibit C, which is shown on the PowerPoint here for the board. Would you please explain to the board what that represents?
Yes. Unit C shows the two Exhibit C shows the two participating areas comprising the unit, Providence, PA, and Sanpete County, due east of Highway 89 and Axtell and south of Mayfield, Covenant, PA, in Sevier County, traversed by U-24 south of Sigurd and east of Glenwood.
Okay, now turning your attention to Exhibit D, would you please explain to the board what this represents?
Yes. It shows the 1,100.48 acres in the PA, 860.48 acres are federal, 80 acres are state, 160 acres are fee. It also reflects the existing wells. Many were drilled directionally due to topography and to minimize surface impact, drilled pursuant to APDs approved by both BLM and DOGM, some of which were exception locations.
And again, this is the Covenant participating area, is that correct?
Correct. And all wells produced from the White Throne and/or Navajo formations, which are combined for PA purposes.
Okay, now turning your attention to Exhibit E, would you please explain to the board what this represents?
Yes, it reflects the 660 acres in the PA, 600 acres are federal, 60 acres are fee. The PA was approved as an enhanced recovery project via gas reinjection by the board in cause number 269-02, shows the existing injector and producing well. Injection and producing intervals are the Navajo Formation.
And again, Exhibit E relates to the Providence participating area, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, Mr. Moritz, now I'm going to direct your attention to what has been marked as Exhibit F for purposes of this hearing. This is a true and correct copy of the Wolverine Unit Agreement without the referenced exhibits, is that correct?
Yes.
And this is part of Wolverine's business records pertaining to the unit that was provided by the Bureau of Land Management, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, on the PowerPoint, I am showing the first page of Exhibit F. Would you please identify for the board what's the important takeaway from this page?
Yes, the BLM certifies and determines unit is, quote, necessary and advisable in the public interest for the purpose of more properly conserving the natural resource, unquote.
Okay, turning to the second page of Exhibit F, which is shown on the PowerPoint. Again, would you please point out to the board what's the important portion of this page?
Yes, SITLA similarly certifies as to trust's interest.
That it's in the interest of the trust to have the conservation of natural resources by the unit agreement?
Correct.
Okay. Now turning your attention to what is the first numbered page of the unit agreement. Again, would you please point out to the board what's the important language in this?
Again, on the page 1 of the unit agreement reiterates the same purposes for the purpose of more properly conserving the natural resources thereof whenever determined and certified by the Secretary of Interior to be necessary or advisable in the public interest.
Okay, and finally, I want to turn your attention to page 22 of the unit agreement. Again, this is shown on the PowerPoint for the board, and point out to the board what is the important point on this particular page.
Yes, Article 16, conservation. Operations hereunder and production of unitized substances shall be conducted to provide for the most economical and efficient recovery of said substances without waste as defined by or pursuant to the state of Utah or federal law regulations.
Okay, could you please confirm then for the board and the record that Wolverine has and will continue to operate the unit under these governing principles?
Yes, we will.
And would you also confirm for the record that Wolverine will maintain a 460-foot, set off from the unit boundaries, or as necessary, will seek exception location approvals?
Yes, we will.
And will you also confirm for the record that Wolverine will provide directional surveys as required under Rule R649-3-11, subparagraph 3, as to directionally drilled wells?
Yes, we will.
Okay, Mr. Moritz, I would now ask you to refer to the certificate and supplemental certificate of services that were filed as pleadings in this matter. They're already on file. Do you have those in front of you?
Yes.
Okay, do you recognize the names and addresses that are shown on those documents?
Yes, I recognize all the names as all owners, as that term is statutorily defined within the unit area. Sitla as the lessor under the state lease, and the BLM, both state and Richfield field offices, as lessor under the federal leases and as unit administrator.
And how are those names and addresses compiled?
They were compiled from search of the BLM, Sitla, and Sanpete County and Sevier County records conducted by GeoScout for Wolverine and from Wolverine's internal land records, including title opinions and paydex.
Okay, and I'd refer the board now to Exhibit Z as supplemented. These are the true and correct copies of the return receipts or of Postal Service inquiries as to the status of said mailings received by my office, supplemented this past Monday. And if you confirm or compare those receipts to the addresses and names shown on the certificate and supplemental certificates of service, you will see that every party listed received a copy of them. With that, that concludes my examination of Mr. Moritz.
Vision?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions. Mr. Moritz, I just would like to have a little better understanding of the ownership. If you could look at Exhibit D for me. So I think you testified with regard to the covenant field that there were 80 acres of fee. Is that correct?
Just a computer. I testified there were 80 acres of state and 160 acres are fee.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you know where the fee is?
Specifically, the fee is in the northwest quarter of 17.
And who is? And do you know the owner? Is that fee all one owner or many owners? Do you know?
It's a family, and and how they divided it up now, I'm not exactly sure.
It's not Wolverine.
No, it's not Wolverine.
Okay. And the Sitla parcel, where is it located?
The parcel. This Sitla parcel is in. I don't know for sure. I'd have to get a map. I don't recall exactly where the Sitla parcel is.
Okay. But as to all of the lands, all of the tracts, and all the owners in this participating area, they are all committed to the unit agreement. There are no uncommitted lands.
Correct. All committed.
And can you tell me, if you know, and this wasn't part of your direct testimony, but who are the owners of the adjacent lands, and particularly in Section 19 where that pad is located?
BLM,
So it's all surrounded by BLM?
yes.
Thank you. Would you turn to Exhibit E then, and just kind of the same questions? How many acres of fee are there?
Okay, I have to get to that one. I have that. So I have to go through my page 5. Providence, there are 600 acres federal, 60 acres are fee, covered by 16 fee leases.
16 separate leases. Do you know where those are, those fee lands are? Is it one tract?
They're undivided, and I don't know specifically what part of Providence they're in.
Again, the same question. There are no uncommitted lands.
There are no uncommitted lands.
And the owner of the surrounding lands, is that also BLM again for this?
There is some fee, majority is BLM.
And as to the BLM lands in both instances, are those lands under mineral lease at the present time, do you know?
You're talking about outside?
Yes, outside.
Yeah, some is HPP and some is not committed, depending on how far away you go.
Okay, thank you for those additional facts. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all. I'm sorry. That's all the questions I have for the witness.
Thank you, board members.
Okay.
Seeing none, back to call your next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Richard.
Yep.
Emily, would you please step into the camera, please? Okay, Emily, would you please state your name and business address for the record?
Yep, my name is Emily Hartwick, and our address is 55 Campo Northwest, Grand Rapids, Michigan, 49503.
And what is your current position with Wolverine?
I am currently the manager of geology, and my areas of responsibility include the Wolverine unit.
Okay, I'm going to direct your attention now to what has been marked as Exhibit G for purposes of this cause. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
And was prepared by you?
Yes, it was.
Okay, would you please explain to the board what this represents and its significance?
Yeah, so Exhibit G shows a stratigraphic column for the Covenant Field, and it highlights the producing sandstones, which are the White Throne and the Navajo. The block diagram on the right side of the exhibit shows the juxtaposition of the White Throne and the Navajo sands over a normal fault. So the White Throne and the Navajo sandstones are stratigraphically separated by the Sinawava, and that is a 50-foot thick non-reservoir mudstone layer. However, the Covenant Field is overprinted with a complex system of normal faults, and these have been identified in wellbores via missing section, and also in a proprietary 3D survey that we have over the field. So in those areas where the normal fault throw is sufficient, the White Throne and the Navajo are in pressure communication. And thus, these formations are included as the same participating area formation. The pressure communication that occurs over these faults has been confirmed with a pressure transient pulse test that was performed in 2008. Now, the White Throne and the Navajo sandstones are aeolian dune sands, so they have an inherent permeability and isotropy associated with their cross-bedded nature. The orientation of the White Throne and the Navajo dune-related permeability and isotropy coupled with this orientation of the fault system, results in a drainage pattern that could be partially limited by those fault block boundaries.
Okay, so in your expert opinion then, do these geological complexities require flexibility in well locations, and in particular may require tighter density than a 40-acre pattern to maximize recovery?
Yes.
Right, is it also your expert opinion that the flexibility will provide opportunities for open hole logging to monitor and evaluate drainage complexities related to the fault system?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my examination of Ms. Hartwick.
Vision?
Yes, we have a few questions. Ms. Hartwick, first of all, I guess if you look at Exhibits E, or let's start with D, I guess, the covenant field.
Mm-hmm.
Can you, for the board, provide some geologic or geographic parameters for the location of those beneath the ground formations where the oil is trapped? I mean, I understand this is none like the Uintah Basin. This is more of a traditional trap where the oil has flown to a certain area where it's contained, and it must have exterior perimeter. Can you describe that perimeter within the covenant field, PA?
Sure. So this trap style, as you described, this is an anticlinal trap. It is a structural position. We do have areas underlain inside of this PA. To speak to areas outside of the PA, I would, with respect, decline to testify to that, as that does get into some proprietary data related to our 3D data.
Right. I was more interested in confirming that in your expert opinion that the 460-foot setback would protect ownership of mineral outside of the PA area.
Correct. At this time, I believe that is true.
So has a participating area been contracted, but conservatively in a way that it allows some margin of error so that there wouldn't be a capture of oil and gas from lands outside of the PA?
Through the history, I do not believe that the PA has ever contracted. We have added to the PA in the past as required when we discovered additional reserves.
I see. I thought that it was originally much, or I guess it wasn't the PA, it was the entire unit area was much larger. But
that is correct.
Okay, but the PA itself has expanded and not contracted.
That is correct.
Was notice given to anybody outside of this participating area of this request? That might be a better question for the landman. I apologize.
Yeah, Fred, what do you advise?
I would say legally no, because there's no change. The current situation prior to this request was that there's a 460-foot setback from the unit boundaries, and so that didn't change, so we didn't notify anybody outside of it.
Okay, and I guess my question is to you as a geologist, do you think that adequately protects the rights of people outside of the participating area? Not adequately giving them notice, but that there's not a risk that their oil and gas will be captured?
Yes, that is my expert opinion.
Thank you. Any other questions? That's all the questions we have.
Board members, questions? I have one question. In the beginning, I believe Wolverine was also looking at a Precambrian play in this, one of these two fields. Was that correct understanding?
Not the Precambrian. We had an open mind, I suppose I would say, to discovering hydrocarbons in any formation. The Precambrian was not on the top of our list. But we were mainly focused on the Jurassic sands, this White Throne and Navajo, and we were that was the main target when we drilled this well at Covenant.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of my questions. Okay, then call your next witness.
All right, thank you, Emily. Ed, would you please step into the camera? Ed, would you please state your name and business address for the record?
My name is Edward A. Higuera. Address is 55 Campow Northwest, Grand Rapids, Michigan, 49503.
And what is your current position with Wolverine?
I am a Vice President of Exploration Engineering for Wolverine, and my areas of responsibility include the Wolverine unit area.
Okay, I would direct your attention now to what have been marked as Exhibits H and I. Do you recognize these documents?
Yes.
And were they prepared by you or Wolverine personnel with your input and review?
Yes.
Okay, turning your attention to Exhibit H, would you please explain to the board what this represents?
Exhibit H illustrates a portion of the field, and it shows a well on the left-hand side and demonstrates that well placement at times will be closer than the 920-foot interval required by the state.
And because of that, if you didn't get the relief that we're requesting today, you would have to file for an exception location approval of that particular well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Turning your attention now to Exhibit I. This is a two-page exhibit. Starting with the first page, would you please explain to the board what this shows?
Exhibit I is a topography map with the boundary of the PA and wells placed on top of it. The purpose of this exhibit is to show the topography and the limited surface locations that are available to us, requiring directional drilling of these wells, and also to pad drilling of multiple wells at a time to take advantage of these limited surface locations and to minimize footprint. Okay. So the second drawing is very similar. It's just a separate and different demonstration of the topography, showing the Rainbow Hills and the Highway 24 on the right hand cutting through the field, and the location of our pads.
Okay, in your expert opinion then, due to the geologic factors that Ms. Hartwig outlined, wells drilled on a 40-acre density pattern may not adequately be spaced to maximize recoveries?
Yes, that is correct.
All right, is it also your expert opinion that without flexibility to place additional wells on a tighter density pattern, it's highly likely that oil reserves would be unrecoverable and waste will occur?
Yes.
Is it also your expert opinion that a tighter density drilling pattern is required in these areas to improve field recovery?
Yes.
Finally, is it your expert opinion that the topographical and environmental constraints limit surface locations and therefore directional drilling will almost always be required for future wells?
Yes.
Okay, that concludes my examination of Mr. Higuera.
Vision?
No, I don't think the division has any questions of Mr. Higuera. Thank you.
Board members. Carl?
On these three proposed locations, do you expect to encounter them in a virgin condition as far as reservoir goes, basically undepleted or incompletely depleted at least? Are they, I guess my question is, do you anticipate that these will be completely separated from the wells that are currently producing?
So our field has a strong water drive. So as we conducted a development drilling over the life of the field, we have, for the most part, encountered virgin or near virgin reservoir pressure. And so our expectation is as we continue drilling, we will find similar type pressures. Does that address your question, Carl?
In part it does.
Okay.
Given that the pressure, that it is a strong water drive, the pressure will tend to remain the same, whether it's been partially depleted of oil or not? Do you anticipate that these locations the oil will not have been depleted yet?
Our expectation is that the oil is still present in those locations.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Other questions, board? Proceed.
How close are these proposed locations to existing wells?
So I will refer you back to my exhibit, Exhibit H, which lists the footages. So the example that is shown here would be our proposed 18-3, and you see that that well ranges from anywhere 832 feet up to roughly 1,521 feet from existing near well bores.
Is this a vertical well?
This would be a directionally drilled, and our general pattern is to build and drop, and so it becomes vertical in the producing zone.
Thank you.
Okay, back to you, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes our presentation in chief. At this time, I would move for admission of Exhibits A through I and Z as supplemented.
Division,
No objection to the admission of the exhibits.
board members? Okay, those exhibits, A through I, Z, and supplement to Z are so admitted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we're now to the division.
Mr. Chairman, the division supports the request. This is a standard thing for a federal unit to waive these two rules or these three rules. There is a presumption that the 460-foot setback presumptively protects the correlative rights of those people outside of the drilling unit or the federal area. And I think the testimony has supported the request and finding that those correlative rights are still protected. The adjoining landowners have the option to petition for spacing if they think that's incorrect, or to drill an offset well. And so I guess ultimately that's a long way of saying we support the request.
Thank you. We're to the, I guess we're back to you, Mr. McDonald, for summation.
I'll waive summation other than to state on behalf of Wolverine, they very much appreciate the opportunity to participate electronically for this hearing, and we want to make sure the board understood that very much. Other than that, we believe that the requirement under regulations have been met, and we appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the board, we appreciate Wolverine and what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish. We congratulate you. With that, we're going to take just a second here to talk to council. Hey, board members, would you like to discuss this matter, or would a motion be in order? Okay. You'll make that.
I move that we accept Wolverine's petition in this matter and approve it.
Okay, is there a second to that?
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion? The motion before you is to approve the request for agency action as submitted. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Let the record show that was unanimous. Mr. McDonald, will you prepare the order?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michigan.
Thank you,
Thank you.
to everyone.
Thank you. Okay, we have two other items on the agenda. I'm going to read those in for the record. Docket number 2018-013, cause number S0030034, in the matter of Lucen Parasite Mine. My understanding that has been withdrawn.
Continued, Mr. Chairman.
Continued. That matter is continued until,
I believe it was continued for 1 month to allow the operator an opportunity to complete the bonding and a few other matters. Emma Whitaker is here, and she's handled that one, but.
okay. So, but for purposes of the record, that matter is continued to our regularly scheduled August hearing.
Yes.
Agenda item number 5 is docket number 2018-014, cause number 210-007 in the matter of Westar Exploration Company. And the status of that, is it withdrawn or continued?
It's been resolved. Again, Ms. Whitaker represented the division in negotiating that, but I think it's withdrawn and considered completed, final.
Okay. That matter then will be withdrawn and dismissed.
There is a stipulation, probably should be clearer. There is a stipulation which allows for the board's continued jurisdiction in case they don't fully comply with the terms of the stipulation. But the terms of the way the language of the stipulation is written, it's dismissed subject to that continuing jurisdiction.
Thank you, that does help. This matter is dismissed with our continuing jurisdiction. Any other matters to come before us today? Seeing none, a motion to adjourn. Moved. Second? Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Let the record show that was unanimous. We are adjourned and off the record. Susan?